If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, share the scariest thing you've seen or experienced but haven't shared with anyone because you thought they wouldn't believe it, whether it's paranormal, unexplained, or unknown. 3 years ago, I was alone at home with my brother for the weekend, while my parents were in another city on a hotel celebrating their wedding day. I was excited when I could be alone at home with my brother because I could play for a long time. But on Saturday night around 4 a.m., I went to the bathroom before going to sleep, but as soon as I enter the bathroom, I first look in the mirror and notice that the door is closed in the mirror even though it was clearly open. After this, I looked in the mirror, so scared and weird. By this time, my brother was already sleeping, and I couldn't shout to him. I was frozen for about 30 seconds. I looked in the mirror, and then I closed the bathroom door, and it didn't even move in the mirror. Then I opened the door again, and it opened in the mirror as it should. This still haunts me even to this day, and nobody believes me, not even my friends or family. Anything similar happen to anyone? So this story is rather short because, as I get older, I'm slowly losing more and more memory of what happened exactly, so I want to tell it while I still remember what's left of it because I don't think I'll ever forget the police. With the glowing eyes, I was really young. I think 16 or 15. Me and my mom were playing video games. It was rather dark out, and my dad was at work. We got a knock at the door. This part I remember clearly. Knock, knock, knock. I go over and look at the little peephole and see nothing. I think it's next door. I go back to playing games. My mom is now in the kitchen, making dinner or something again. Knock, knock, knock. This time I hear loudly, "It's the police. Please open the door." I look out the window and see two completely black/shrouded individuals with glowing red eyes. Now we have a little light at our door, so it should have shown some features, but they were completely black, not skin tone, black though like shadows. It's tough to explain anyway. I'm kind of freaked out, so I go to my mom. Tell her it's the police. She heads to the door and says, "Hello, who is it?" Again, we get knock, knock, knock. It's the police. Same exact voice, same exact tone. My mom, having a suspicious looking face, looks through the peep, and everything on her face drops, and I knew she saw it too. She looks at me and tells me to get down. I do. She again says, "What do you need? What can I do for you again?" They knock, 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 knock. "The police, please open the door." She quietly, as she can, pushes it and locks the bottom. Again, she says, "Please tell me what I am opening the door for this time." With no response, she goes to get her phone, me being a dumb kid. I look again. And they are closer, red eyes glowing brighter, I think, and the light outside is gone. It's just the silhouettes. I scream, being genuinely horrified at this point, and my mom rushes back, knife in hand, as I hide behind the couch. She's on the phone with my dad. Explaining the situation the best she can. My dad, of course, thinks she's crazy but says he's on his way. Then she calls the cops, and as she does this, they slam on the door. Knock, knock, knock. It's the police. Please open up. She yells, "Go away." I have a gun. She didn't. She had a knife in hand, and so did I. Being a dumb kid, I quickly grabbed one from the kitchen without her noticing. To be honest, I don't really remember what happens past this. I remember looking again and my mom looking again, screaming as she pushes the knife away from me, then it stops. I look again, and they are gone, and my dad is home, saying none of what happened. You know, not believing us, and the police actually say that they had no one on record come to my house to check on anything. I really want to remember as much as I can before my memory of this fades, and I hope you believe me about the red-eyed police. I am now 32 and female. There have been a few actually terrifying things I've experienced in my life so far. One of the first ones was in my cousin's trailer. We were kids and lived in a trailer park that consisted of my family only. So all aunts, uncles, and cousins are in about 6 trailers. One day we were playing hide and seek in my cousin's trailer. They are sisters. It was 5 of us total. All girls. 2 sets of sisters and myself. It was my turn to seek. I counted and went looking for my cousins. I checked in a few good places we hid in, then decided to go to the girls' room. As soon as I turned the hallway into their doorway, I saw a tall, black cloaked figure standing there holding a photo of them that was on their dresser. It had a flowy cloak that seemed like it was made from very dark smoke. It was staring at the photo of them, and it didn't seem to notice me right away. I kind of gasped, and it turned quickly and looked right at me. All I could see was the blackest hole where the head should have been. I immediately ran into the living room screaming and crying and begging for everyone to come out of their spots. They all came out confused and annoyed. I tried telling them what I saw, and no one believed me. My heart was beating so hard, and I couldn't calm down, so I just walked home. When I was a child, my family and I lived in a haunted house on the outskirts of town. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, but it didn't take long for strange things to start happening. One night, I was in the living room watching TV with my dad when I got up to use the bathroom and saw the ghostly figure of a little boy standing at the end of the hallway. He looked sad, but also as if he were trying to communicate something to me. Suddenly, he gestured for me to follow him into the bathroom. I wasn't sure if I should go, but I felt drawn to the boy. So, I followed him down the hallway and into the bathroom. Once I was inside, I no longer saw him, but I felt an eerie feeling wash over me. Something compelled me to look into the bathtub, and as I pulled back the shower curtain, I saw the little boy lying in the tub, his eyes and mouth wide open as if he were struggling to breathe. I was terrified and ran back down the hall to my dad. As I sat on his lap and tried to explain what I had just seen, he looked at me with a look of shock and concern. He then revealed to me that the previous owner of the house had committed a murder. The man had ended his entire family, burying his wife's body inside one of the bedroom walls and drowning his son in the very same bathtub I had just seen the little boy in. It all made sense now. The little boy's ghost had been trying to communicate the tragic events that had occurred in the house before we moved in. It was a haunting experience that stuck with me for years, and I never felt completely comfortable in that house again. Eventually, my family decided to move out of the house, and it has remained vacant ever since. The ghostly apparitions and eerie feelings that haunted our time are a reminder that sometimes the past can come back to haunt us in ways we never could have imagined. There's a lot of stories surrounding my whole family. As part of a little backstory, I'm Mexican, and most of my mom's family is originally from a small cowboy town. I have many stories that take place there. Tonight's story takes place in said ghostly town approximately 50 years ago, and I'm telling it just like my Aunt Lulu says it happened. One evening, young Lulu left home and walked to her friend Terry's house. Both girls spent the time talking, and when they realized it was already dark, the good thing was that Lulu lived only 2 blocks away from Tara. The bad thing was that the town was already pitch black. There really hadn't been many city-like features in town yet, and electricity seemed like a wild dream, so Lulu decided to go walking before it started getting late. As Lulu walked, she suddenly heard a rattling noise. She stopped and listened. The rattling noise seemed to come from a reasonable distance, and Lulu, thinking it might be a snake, hurried her step. She could still hear the rattling noise. Then it stopped. Lulu kept walking straight forward, with no intention of turning back. When she heard it again, that rattling sound, only this time she could hear it getting closer. She started to walk quickly, but the sound started getting closer and closer each time, and she started to run with that rattling sound running fast behind her. As she got closer home, she screamed, and the rattling sound yelled behind her, a long, inhuman, piercing cry of sorrow. She got to her door, and without yet turning around, she managed to open it and get inside her house when she smelled it. A foul stench, the worst she has ever recalled, filled her house. As she tried to close the door, a big, bony hand held it open, and that's when she finally got a glimpse of the horror that stalked her. A decaying man, without any flesh left on most of his body, screaming in agony, was trying to make his way into her house. Somehow, she managed to push the corpse away and close the door. Then the banging on the door started. At this point, my grandfather got up from bed and had already made his way to the front door carrying his pistol, only to find his oldest daughter weeping on the floor, surrounded by a foul stench. Then the banging stopped. Grandfather opened the door, despite his daughter's sobbing, but all he could see was the pitch blackness of the streets, and at the distance, he could hear a rattling sound. It started a few weeks ago when I moved into my new apartment. The place was old but cheap, which is why I jumped on it. The landlord warned me about the basement, though. He said it was off limits. Just a storage area, he told me, not safe to go down there. But curiosity got the better of me. One night, I heard faint noises coming from the basement. Scratching, almost like someone was trying to get out. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but the sound kept growing louder, like a muffled voice whispering my name. I was home alone. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously went down the stairs. The basement was freezing, the kind of cold you feel in your bones. I scanned the room, but all I found were dusty boxes and old furniture. Then I heard it. Soft whispers, just behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart raced, and I ran back upstairs, slamming the door behind me. That night, the whispers became clearer. I didn't sleep at all, terrified at what had just happened. The next day, I asked the landlord about it. He looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You shouldn't have gone down there. That basement. It's not what you think." I haven't heard the whispers since, but I swear, sometimes, late at night, I can still feel them watching me, waiting for me to go back. This story might be hard to believe, but it happened. It's your choice whether you want to believe it or not. I'm just here to share what I experienced. Okay, so one day me and my good friend decide to go hunting at our usual time and place, which is a large area of land with lots of greenhouses scattered all over the place. We wait for it to get dark, then we head out. Once we arrive at our usual spot, we load our guns and prepare our knives. Then, in complete darkness, we head down so we can get close to the end of the property and get a good view of any animals. But while we were heading there, I saw a 12-foot, completely black shadow figure with no face standing in the distance next to one of the greenhouses. I decided not to say anything about it because I didn't want to scare my friend. We get to where we were heading, and we stand there for a good minute looking around to see if we can see any animals but see nothing. Then everything went silent, with the only sound being the nearby highway and the wind. My friend turns to me and says, "You seeing that?" I turn to face the direction he is facing, and I see the same figure I saw earlier just standing there, doing absolutely nothing. We stare at it for a second, then it disappears. And then all of a sudden we begin to hear footsteps circling around us. And then we hear clicking sounds so loud it was as if someone was clicking their fingers inside of our ears. Starting to get freaked out, we turned on our flashlight. The battery was at 80%. We look around with the flashlight and see nothing. But the clicking in our ears continues. Yating really freaked out, we begin to make our way out of the property. We look down at the flashlight, and its battery's at 45%. We decide to pick up the pace. Then, after about a minute, we look at the flashlight again, and it's at 1%. Then about 30 seconds later it's completely dead. Plunged in darkness, we exited the property. I rub my hands together as it is cold. But I feel a pain in my left hand. So I look down at my knuckles and see 3 burn marks. We make our way back to my place and make our way to my room to put away the guns and knives. Then he leaves and goes home. The next day we call, and I tell him about the burn marks, and he tells me how he's been seeing that figure. About a week later, I come across a handprint on the outside of my bedroom window. I'm on the 2nd floor. About another 2 weeks go by, and I start to see a shorter version of the figure around the house at night. My aunt and uncle lived right down our street. Almost daily I walked down our little road to play at their house with my 2 cousins. I was 8 and my cousins were 8 and 10. It was a modest 3-bedroom home. It had a garage and a washroom that were not attached to the rest of the home. They never used the garage or the washroom. They had installed a washer/dryer in the kitchen of the home. When they had moved in, they cleaned out the garage and put plastic bags over the windows. The garage door was always open, as was the door to the washroom. We played mostly in the backyard, but we did fool around in the garage at times. The floor was asphalt like the driveway. The washroom floor was concrete. The walls in the washroom were yellow, and about 7 feet off the floor, there was a single white shelf, above a window, that had 3 gnomes on it. They were dusty and creepy. They had stretched smiles and thick eyebrows. They were all looking different ways. We used to scare each other and talk about how they weren't facing the way they were earlier in the day. I guess we scared ourselves pretty well since we rarely went near the washroom. But there was a door on the far wall of the washroom, and of course, we were curious. One day we summoned up enough courage to try and open the door. We took turns scaring each other as we went deeper and got closer to that back door. We poked and yelled at each other as we inched closer. But before we knew it, we stood before the door. One of my cousins told me to open it. I reached for it and put my hand on the knob. I was scared. But I felt like the gnomes were watching me. I fought hard not to look back and up to that shelf. I sensed that the gnomes were watching me more intensely than my cousins were. But I pushed through that feeling and turned the knob. I was hoping it was locked. It was not. I slowly opened the door. The door leads to a small storage pantry. Not even a walk-in. We stayed there, looking at the old, wooden, cobweb-covered shelves. Then we heard a loud yoo-hoo-ha. We all jumped and looked at each other. We started to run out, and one of the gnomes was on the ground. The other 2 were looking toward the door. We ran out of the washroom and inside the house. We were told years later that the family that previously lived in that house lost their children to unknown circumstances. From what I was told, the parents left because the memories of their children hurt them too much. But maybe they left because their children wouldn't leave the home or them alone. It is something that is burned into my memory. That home has since been torn down. But this memory is the first thing I think of when I see that lot. My dad has some stories from his experiences living in California, so I recorded one of them over break and thought I would share. Me and this guy, a friend of mine, were out drinking beer one night, driving around, running amok out in the middle of the desert, out by 29 Palms. We were miles from anywhere or anything, literally just bonsaiing out on these old roads way out in the middle of flippin' nowhere. I mean, we are 20 to 25 miles from the nearest telephone pole. We come across this Datsun B210, that was like brand new back in the 70s, and it was burned from the firewall back. But on the front of the car, the paint was still on it and everything. So we all like, oh man, check out this car. We pull up and we get our lights on it, and it's super dark, no moon, in the middle of the desert, and it's just completely black out there. It had a good engine in it. We had a whole truck full of tools and a whole bunch of beer, so hell. We just started tearing at it. I go, FCK, check it out, man, I can use this engine in my truck. This is perfect. So we started taking the engine apart and taking it out. We're drinking beer, we got the speakers up on the hood of the car, and we're in there twisting wrenches and just having a time. He didn't have an auto reverse cassette deck, so we had to go back and reverse/change the tape every time it ended. You had to go over there and physically take it out, turn it around, and put it back in. There were no radio stations, so that's all we were listening to. We're almost getting ready to get the engine out and the tape ends again. But we're in the middle of doing something, and we couldn't jump up to go change it. So we're twisting wrenches in this unbelievable, dead of night quiet. And then we could hear something running around. You know where the light from the headlights and KC light stops being light and it turns to darkness? That's where we heard it. We heard it running around. You'd hear it from over here and running to over there, a little pitter-patter running through the sand, across the desert, and brushes and stuff like that. We were like, what the hell? He stopped to tell us that he had the chills and goosebumps there in the room. Said he could remember it like it was yesterday. We look at each other and are like, whisper, what the FCK was that? We stopped and were completely silent. You could almost hear your heartbeat. And you'd hear it again over there, so we'd turn our heads and look over there, using gestures to point, and we'd look over here on this side. And we looked at each other like, WTF face and mutterings under the breath. We take our flashlights and look over there. Can't see anything. We'd get back to work, then hear it again, and we were like, FCK it, we're out of here. This is freaking us out. So we took off, came back the next day, during the day, and finished pulling the engine out. Well, we went out and looked around. I was kicking around out in the brush where we heard the tracks, and there were all these teeny little footprints. Like, little kid, barefoot kid footprints. Barefoot in the sand, all around the perimeter of where we were. It wasn't us. We had boots on, and we are big, size 11/12 guys. And we're miles and miles from anything. But there was nothing out there, no houses, nothing. Just little footprints running around in the dark. But there's a lot of activity out there, probably 200 miles from Area 51, another 80 miles from Death Valley. There's tons and tons and tons of just barren, desert wasteland nothing. But there was something out there that wouldn't come into the light that night. Black Aggie. When Felix Anyus put up the life-size shrouded bronze statue of a grieving angel, seated on a pedestal, in the Anyus family plot in the Druid Ridge Cemetery, he had no idea what he had started. The statue was a rather eerie figure by day, frozen in a moment of grief and terrible pain. At night, the figure was almost unbelievably creepy, the shroud over its head obscuring the face until you were up close to it. There was a living air about the grieving angel, as if its arms could really reach out and grab you if you weren't careful. It didn't take long for rumors to sweep through the town and surrounding countryside. They said that the statue, nicknamed Black Aggie, was haunted by the spirit of a mistreated wife who lay beneath her feet. The statue's eyes would glow red at the stroke of midnight, and any living person who returned the statue's gaze would instantly be struck blind. Any pregnant woman who passed through her shadow would miscarry. If you sat on her lap at night, the statue would come to life and crush you to death in her dark embrace. If you spoke Black Aggie's name 3 times at midnight in front of a dark mirror, the evil angel would appear and pull you down to hell. They also said that spirits of the dead would rise from their graves on dark nights and gather around the statue at night. People began visiting the cemetery just to see the statue, and it was then that the local fraternity decided to make the statue of grief part of their initiation rites. Black Aggie sitting, where candidates for membership had to spend the night crouched beneath the statue with their backs to the grave of General Anyus, became popular. One dark night, 2 fraternity members accompanied New Hope to the cemetery and watched while he took his place underneath the creepy statue. The clouds had obscured the moon that night, and the whole area surrounding the dark statue was filled with a sense of anger and malice. It felt as if a storm were brewing in that part of the cemetery, and to their chagrin, the two fraternity members noticed that gray shadows seemed to be clustering around the body of the frightened fraternity candidate crouching in front of the statue. What had been a strange initiation rite suddenly took on an air of danger. One of the fraternity brothers stepped forward in alarm to call out to the initiate. As he did, the statue above the boy stirred ominously. The two fraternity brothers froze in shock as the shrouded head turned toward the new candidate. They saw the gleam of glowing red eyes beneath the concealing hood as the statue's arms reached out toward the cowering boy. With shouts of alarm, the fraternity brothers leapt forward to rescue the new initiate. But it was too late. The initiate gave one horrified yell, and then his body disappeared into the embrace of the dark angel. The fraternity brothers skidded to a halt as the statue thoughtfully rested its glowing eyes upon them. With gasps of terror, the boys fled from the cemetery before the statue could grab them, too. Hearing the screams, a night watchman hurried to the unused plot. To his chagrin, he discovered the body of a young man lying at the foot of the statue. The young man had apparently died of fright. The disruption caused by the statue grew so acute that the Anyus family finally donated it to the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. The grieving angel sat for many years in storage there, never again to plague the citizens visiting the Druid Hill Park Cemetery. I was stalked for years by a skeletal entity that was in the woods surrounding my childhood home. I lived in the mountains my whole childhood, and when I was 12, I was friends with these sisters that lived one cul-de-sac over. The roads were separated by a patch of trees, and I would walk through them to go play. One day my dad and I were invited to a barbecue at their house. That evening, me, the sisters, and their friends were jumping on their trampoline in the backyard when the younger sister started acting weird. When asked, she said she was seeing something on the far side of the next door neighbor's fence every time she jumped. One by one, we all tried it, and we all could see something. At first we dismissed it as the neighbor's big fluffy dog. We went inside to tell the neighbor his dog might have gotten out and went upstairs to the sister's room. But while up there, they started telling us about a skeletal figure that would enter their room at night and watch them. The younger sister told us about one time she threw a pillow at it and it hit the figure, and about how they think it gets up there by climbing the gutter pipe next to their window. We all went quiet because we were scared, of course, when we heard a click 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 outside the window that clearly sounded like metal. Of course, we all dashed out the door and downstairs to the adults because we were thoroughly freaked out. I had my dad carry me home because I was too scared to look into the dark woods. But even then, I didn't fully believe them until they moved away a week later and I saw the thing myself. It was late evening, and I was heading inside after playing in the woods when I saw it peeking at me from behind a tree. It looked like a skeleton, except sharper, with spiky protrusions around its joints. And it had red pinprick lights in its hollow eye sockets. I pretended I didn't see it and hurried inside. That night I woke up to something scratching at the wall under my window. I would wake up multiple times a week to scratch. It was like something was trying to get my attention, so I would look outside, and exactly what spot I was hearing the scratching was tall enough for an adult human to reach their arms up, and this entity was adult human sized. I never did look, I was too scared, but the scratching happened for years until I moved out of that house. And that wasn't the only time I saw the thing in the woods, but I never noticed it again after I moved out. I don't tell this story a lot because people always dismiss it as deer. But that would have to be one consistent deer, scratching at my wall 3 to 4 times a week for at least 3 years straight. A few years ago, when I was 16 to 17, I worked in a restaurant as a waitress. There were 2 locations, one in my town, which I'll call Restaurant A, and one in a town about 30 minutes away, Restaurant B. I should mention that Restaurant B is located in a rougher area, and many of my coworkers weren't from the best of backgrounds. Nonetheless, they were sweet people, and I trusted them. I was trusted as a manager on Thursdays at Restaurant B, which usually meant I was the cashier/server/manager and the only other person would be a cook, which I'll call Dave. In the restaurant there is a front glass door that customers use and a backwood door, no window in the door. We used to take out trash and such. One day, we had no business, and I was in the kitchen with Dave and another cook that was about to leave. We're standing around talking, with Dave right in front of the back door, the other cook to the side of the door, and me about 5 feet away from Dave in line with the door. He had a bag of trash in his hand, and he was going to take it out. He opened the door while still facing me and talking, and behind the door was a person. It was clearly a person in a gray t-shirt, jeans, and a black hat. I saw him for a split second, long enough to know someone was there, and then Dave noticed my face and turned around, which blocked my view, and the guy was gone. The other cook saw my face turn white as a sheet when Dave had opened the door and joked that I looked like I had just seen a ghost. Oh, the irony, while Dave started looking around outside to see what I could have seen. I started actually panicking. I have severe anxiety and panic disorder, and Dave was trying to calm me down, but he also seemed really freaked out. He asked me what I had seen. I told him I saw someone, I described the person, and what he told me next will never leave me. Dave started crying and ran out the door with his phone in his hand. He was outside for nearly half an hour, and when he came back in, he was calmer but still nervous. He told me that roughly 10 years ago, he and his friend were in a horrible car accident, which ended in his friend dying. He told me the person I described standing outside of the door was wearing the exact outfit his friend had died in. And apparently, I wasn't the first person to see the ghost of his friend. Dave told me that whenever something were to happen to anyone in his family, his friend would show up to either him or his family. For example, one time he saw the ghost of his friend, and literally a minute later his phone rang, and he found out his father had just suffered a massive heart attack. When he had gone out of the door, he was calling his family to make sure everyone was okay. Luckily, they were. But, not even 2 days later, he found out his wife had miscarried. As if that wasn't weird enough, the same night I saw the ghost, something else weird happened that I believe was paranormal, but I also understand it could have been paranoia. I was up front at the register, still shaken up, and a huge crow was hovering outside of the front door. It was so weird, it literally was just flying in place. It suddenly flew away, and then a really strange-looking man approached the door and opened it wide, but didn't enter. He had the creepiest smile on his face the entire time. Moments later, the crow was back, and it almost came into the restaurant, but another customer swatted it away. The man literally turned around and left, didn't order anything, and didn't say a word. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I'm just hoping someone reads this and understands that what I went through is real, because everyone I know doesn't believe in the paranormal and thinks I was just imagining things. When I was around 8 years old, I went on a weekend camping trip with a big group of people, mostly boys around my age and their dads. I woke up in the middle of the night because I had to pee, so I crawled out of the tent without waking anyone. Our tents were in a big clearing, so I walked over to the tree line to find a spot, but that's when I noticed something weird. All of a sudden, the forest went quiet. I remember noticing specifically that I couldn't even hear the leaves crunching underneath my feet anymore, even though I could feel them as I walked. A moment later I walked up on some sort of spirit that looked like a man in robes standing on top of a stump. He had a glowing light around him, and his facial features were blurred, like there was a haze around his face. I wasn't scared at all, and we talked and stayed there together for a while. When I finally walked out of the tree line back to camp, one of the chaperones immediately ran up to me, saying they had been looking for me and asking where I had been for so long. I told him I had to use the bathroom and met an angel in the woods. He just kind of dismissed it and sent me back to my tent. I wish so badly that I could remember what we talked about, but I have no idea. All I remember is meeting him. As a kid, I didn't think twice about it and continued my camping trip like nothing even happened. It wasn't until I was older looking back on the experience that I realized how strange it was. Has anyone else ever had something happen to them like this? My family has a campsite we would go to every year on Memorial Week that's deep in the Apache Reservation. It's always an amazing experience, with no trip being the same due to crazy phenomena. The campsite requires special permission and permits due to it being religious grounds for ceremonies. Paint a picture. The campsite is in a small valley surrounded by 4 different types of mountains. A white stone plateau, a crumbling rock slide nightmare, a black stone plateau with lots of small caves, and a tiny super fun mountain that we always take the kids and first-time climbers up. Within the mountains, it creates a funnel for the animals to make a fun wildlife viewing experience. The campsite itself is right next to a creek. Now to the topic. We've had many different, unexplainable events happen. Examples. Every night we go to sleep to drums and chants being sung all night, orbs in every picture, animals following you around the trails like certain birds, the feeling of always being watched but never in an I'm going to be harmed kind of way, and the disembodied voices every time anyone hikes alone down the creek. The absolute craziest thing that has happened there was that late at night, my nephew and I were the last to hit the rack. We were sitting at the campfire, waiting for it to go down a little more before going to sleep. Next thing we know, what I can only describe as darkness rolled into the campsite. This darkness was so thick that we couldn't see the trees or the creek anymore. The weird part is it fell dead silent. We could no longer hear the crickets or even the flow of the creek anymore. I pointed this out to my nephew, and he was in pure panic. It stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes and then returned to normal. To sum up, I have many other stories from that site. No matter how much I try to rationalize the event, I still can't explain how the sound was blocked. The go-to that people have is it was fog or a low cloud. I know what fog looks like. We get fog there every morning, and it's amazing. A low cloud might explain the darkness to an extent but doesn't explain the sound. So a little bit ago I was having issues in the house. I rented a room in the house, and when everyone else moved out, I was the last one there. Recently I had gotten 2 new roommates, but they moved out in the middle of the night. Then, almost as soon as they left, I had gotten 2 different roommates. I have some videos and IPs of the things I caught. No images of what they are, nothing caught on tape that was an image, just IPs. Many people could hear them, and my door handle moving. I just got a new door handle on my door, so there wasn't much reason for it to be making noise, shaking, or unlocking on its own. As time went on, I decided to pray, and that seemed to really calm things down. In fact, it seemed to simply go away. But today I was taking a shower in the shower room, where I had caught the most EVs. Before I went to take a shower, I heard a little boy's voice, not a little girl like before, but I felt it was similar to whatever she was. It said, "Caitlin, you are my mama, FKN weird." I instantly remembered an if I took earlier of a girl voice saying ma, ma. In that bathroom. I went in and turned the water on, and well, I was taking a shower. What more can be said? While I was in there, I kept hearing a little boy and a little girl telling me to come here. I figured it was just the water from the shower, I guess, and the white noise from it. So I kept scrub-dub-dubbing. Then I heard my own voice crystal clear, and it kept saying Caitlin and Caitlin, come here. I rinsed and then squeaked the shower handle to close the water. Still thinking or forcing myself to believe it was just the white noise from the water. Then I heard it again from the other side of the shower room. I listened more closely and I heard my voice again. It sounded like it came from the cabinet underneath my sink. Well, I dried off and pretended like I didn't hear anything at all. I don't want to believe it is back. So I simply, I will continue to ignore it. Me and my mom went on a haunted road trip of sorts about a year ago through Virginia, stopping in at strange places as we made our way down to the Shenandoah Valley to hike. We went to stay at this one hotel called the Old Town Inn in Manassas, Virginia, which through forums I had found had a haunted room with a supposedly polite ghost named Lucy. When we arrived, we asked if that room was free, to which the clerk said yes and expressed both surprise and excitement that we even had heard about this ghost. Well, we had a busy day and were tired, so we mostly just got comfortable and hung out a little before going to sleep. My mom is a pretty strict skeptic, though she loves paranormal stuff as she wants to believe. She's like that with just about everything from supernatural stuff to religion. She says she'd believe if she really experienced something but just hasn't. Before we went to sleep, she told me, I don't know why, but I get a sense in this room, I don't know, that Lucy won't appear to you because you're not opening yourself up to it. It was a weird thing to say, and honestly, I was kind of annoyed because I was the one who did believe and who had dragged her all the way out there to see haunted stuff. But, whatever, moms can be weird sometimes, so I shrugged it off and went to sleep. I woke up around 3 in the morning to a scratching sound. I suffer from chronic sleep paralysis and am quite aware of that feeling, so believe me when I say I was fully awake. I could move, I just didn't want to. Even though the ghost was apparently nice, I was a little terrified. I opened my eyes and could definitely hear that the scratching was coming directly from my mom's bed. I was facing her, and she seemed asleep. There was no movement, just the noise like something was scratching at her comforter. It was like I could see where the noise was coming from, but nothing was there. Fast forward to morning. I wake up again and am excited as hell to tell my mom about it. Well, it turns out she heard it too and stayed still to not disturb it because she wanted to feel even more. She asked if I felt anything else, and I said no. Then she explained how not long after that she felt pressure coming from under the bottom of her mattress, like something was pushing up from under the mattress against her feet. We got up and pulled the mattress off, but it was just a solid wooden panel. As a side note, seeing as the clerk was surprised we even knew about the ghost, I doubt it was some kind of trick or mechanism by the hotel to make money. Obviously their income was not related to ghosts, lol. It was strange for sure and had my mom a little shaken, but we continued on our trip safe and sound. A couple months later, I brought it up to her because we had never really had a serious conversation about it. I asked her how, having experienced something like that, something she totally couldn't explain, she reasoned around it. Like, how do you remain skeptical after that? She told me that honestly she didn't know how to explain it and had been just sort of pushing it to the back of her mind to not think about, that it was the first time in her life of loving the paranormal and looking for it that she had ever actually experienced it, and that she didn't have an answer. So, that's it. I don't know if anyone's been to the inn or has any helpful information to give. In retrospect, I'm kind of realizing that most of the strange experiences in my life have been when I was with my mom, and I kind of wonder if she has a sort of gift. She's just been ignoring her whole life and reasoning her way around so she wouldn't have to deal with it. Anyway, comments and thoughts are welcome. Thanks for hearing me out. In January of this year I was in Sisophon, Cambodia, middle of nowhere, with my brother and 2 traveling companions. We were staying in the only hotel in town, which is a huge, and very old, French colonial building. 14 ceilings, hardwood floors, solid teak doors, crown molding. You get the picture. There were only 2 other groups of guests in the place. One was a Chinese woman and her mother, and one was a group of 5 aid workers of mixed nationality, ranging in age between their early 40s and late 20s. The hotel was 5 stories, so each group had an entire enormous floor to itself. At this point, the 4 of us had been traveling together for 3 months in very cramped quarters. Rooms were only $4.50, so we took the opportunity to spread out to the opposite ends of the floor and all have a room to ourselves. I was dead asleep when the very heavy door to my room started slamming repeatedly against its frame. It was locked, and it was as if a strong man was shaking it violently back and forth by the handle. I had been woken up this way multiple times by my traveling companions, so I rolled over and checked my watch. When I saw that it was 3:30 a.m., chills ran down my arms and up the back of my neck, because there is no way anyone I was with would be awake at that time. I bolted out of bed, got in a fighting stance near the door, and said in the least terrified voice I could muster, "Hello?" The door abruptly stopped shaking. I stood there straining to hear footsteps over the blood pounding in my ears, but none came. I started walking back toward the bed, but then heard the unmistakable sound of hundreds of children running and laughing. It sounded as if the hallway was packed full with a stampede of ecstatic grade schoolers sprinting past my door. After about 30 seconds, the sound of the children faded away. I stood in the middle of the room completely clueless as to what to do next. Before this, I did not believe in anything supernatural at all. I couldn't believe what had happened, but I was completely terrified, so I decided the only thing for it was to sprint to my brother's room and find out if he had heard any of it or if I was just dreaming. I opened the door, ran as fast as I could down the hall, and almost ran smack into him coming around the corner. He had had exactly the same experience. We went down the hall and knocked on the 3rd guy's door, but he didn't answer. We were pretty freaked out, so immediately we assumed he had been abducted by the Ghost Child Army. We went to the 4th guy's room and found the 3rd guy in there in the same state as us. Both of them had experienced everything I described. The next morning we tried to ask the proprietor if they knew anything about it, but he spoke 0 English, and our Khmer didn't extend past please, thank you, and 1 to 10, all the way on up to metaphysical horror, so we didn't get very far. Believe it or not, this happened to my friends and me. As I said before this, I did not believe in the supernatural. I don't know what to believe, but I know what happened that night, and it was definitely paranormal. When I was about 10 years old, my brother, who was 8 at the time, and cousin, who was 9, all stayed with my grandparents one night. My cousin lives at the other end of the country. We didn't see him very often, and he has some kind of social difficulty. He is awkward and has never been diagnosed, and was very needy compared to me and my brother. We were all staying in my grandmother's spare room, which had 2 twin beds, which my brother/cousin slept in at one end of the rectangular-shaped room, and I was on an air mattress at the other end of the bedroom, which was directly opposite the bedroom door. My cousin got up whining that he was scared of the dark, and my grandma came upstairs and told him to go back to bed. She left the landing light on and the door half open, and we went back to bed. I remember being able to hear the TV downstairs, and my cousin was restless. I was awake but just tried to sleep. Not long later, and I remember because I was still awake, although I was starting to drop off, I saw through the very dimly lit bedroom, what I can only describe as a goblin/dwarf of about 2 feet in height, smack the end of my cousin's bed, and I saw the silhouette of it run out of the room. It didn't move the door, it sort of just maneuvered through the opening. I remember hearing its footsteps as it ran out. I absolutely froze and just lay there, uncertain of what I saw for a minute. My heart was racing and my feet and palms were sweating, but I just froze. Seconds later, to my horror, my cousin got up and put the light on and walked downstairs to see my grandma, complaining that something had banged on his bed. The whole time I lay on the air mattress, not wanting to believe what I just saw, and my cousin whining on just confirmed it. My grandma came up and told him to stop being silly and go to sleep. I didn't say a word, but I know what I saw. 20 years later, I can still remember the whole thing. My brother was fast asleep throughout. My grandma still lives in that house. I had some night terrors in that house when I was little, but other than that, I don't find anything particularly supernatural about it. I have never experienced anything like it before or since. I spoke about it with a friend years later, and they said maybe it was a house demon? I don't know. I live in NW, Ohio, a rural community, and this happened in the early 1990s. My girlfriend and I were at a local nature area. There is a small fishing pond there, county roads to the north and east, and woods to the west and south. My truck was facing kind of northeast. It was near dusk, and we were sitting on the tailgate of my truck just talking and listening to music. There were a few other people at the park at that time. As time went on, other cars left the park, and it started getting darker. The mosquitoes were getting bad, so we decided to get in the truck. We sat there a little while longer, the radio was on, but at low volume as we continued talking. We were just getting to know each other, so there was a lot to talk about. We both heard a sound, like a thumping or banging sound coming from the wooded area, but it seemed far away. I turned off my truck radio, and we just listened. Some dogs were barking in the distance, but we didn't hear anything else out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off, turned my radio back on, and we just went about our business. I should say that my truck ignition was off, it was just on accessory to run the radio, so no engine noise and no headlights. After a few minutes, we hear a similar sound again. Same response. Turned off the radio and just listened. Nothing. I decided to just leave the radio off at this point. We were talking about getting ready to head out and go into town. Then, and I'll describe this as best as I can, things went wild. A sound that I can only describe as a choir of voices suddenly started. There was what sounded like stringed instruments replicated by a pipe organ. The voices were chanting words, but I can't tell you what language it was. I didn't recognize any of the words, but it was an ominous/very unsettling chanting in a high register. And it sounded as if the sounds were coming from every direction. It was in no way a pleasant sound. It instantly filled me with fear and dread. It was evil. As if the truck was surrounded. I quickly reached and started my truck and turned on the headlights, fully expecting to see a ring of robed figures surrounding us. As unlikely and crazy as that sounds, that is what my thoughts were preparing for based on what we were hearing. I have a hard time sharing just how intense the sound/chinning was, and it sounded close. Like they were right outside the windows. As soon as the headlights came on, silence. Nothing. Nothing running away, no sound other than my engine. Everything is completely normal. Without saying anything, I put it in drive, and we tore out of the parking area and headed south. Once we got away from there, we recounted what had just happened. Neither of us had any explanation but agreed on one thing. It was without a doubt the most frightening and unexplainable thing we had ever experienced. I guess I'm not looking for an explanation. I realize how fantastical this sounds, but every word is true. I shared what happened with a couple of my friends the next day, but it's a story pretty much kept to myself over the years, sharing only with people that would appreciate it. When I was 9, my family moved to a brand new home in the suburbs outside Toronto. I remember, one summer morning, waking up and getting dressed. From my mirror, you could perfectly see the window and balcony door in the hallway. While getting dressed, I saw a woman with long black hair looking out the window. Thinking it was my mom, who also has black hair, I simply said, "Good morning, Mom." As any happy-go-lucky 9-year-old would. I didn't get a response, so I looked into the hallway, and there was no one there. I figured she'd walked to her room or my sister's to put away laundry or dust like she usually did on the weekends. I called down the hall and still got no response. I eventually called down the stairs and found out my mom was loading laundry 2 floors below me in the basement. A few years later, I, being around 11 or 12 at the time, and my little sister, being around 2 or 3, were hanging out with my grandparents. My grandma put my sister down for her usual afternoon nap and came down to watch TV with me and my grandpa. My sister's room was directly above the living room. All of a sudden we heard the little pitter-patter of footsteps above our heads. We figured we'd let her play around for a bit and see if she eventually settled down. It would stop and start up again every few minutes. Finally, my grandma had enough and went upstairs to check on her. She snuck up so she could catch my sister off guard. She swears to this day she heard footsteps coming from that room even as she walked up the stairs. When she opened the door, my sister was passed out cold in her bed. This was around the time that she had begun talking to imaginary friends, so I was especially freaked out. A couple months later, me and my friend were hanging out in my room playing guitar. Suddenly my door slammed shut, similar to how a door closes when someone leaves a window open. We thought nothing of it, assuming one of the windows was probably just open. But then, the door opened. This was a door that had to have the knob twisted. It couldn't be pushed or pulled open by any air pressure. We immediately freaked out and hightailed it outside. It got to a point where I would see a figure out of the corner of my eye, watching me at the top of the stairs or down the hall. There was a constant feeling of being watched in that home. The basement was the absolute worst. It felt not only that you were being watched but that you were unwanted there. My dog absolutely refused to go down there. The day that we moved out of the house, I was around 15, my parents sent me down to retrieve some stuff from the basement. I just felt this unbelievable sense of dread, like whatever was down there did not want me taking what was left of the stuff in the basement. I booked it out of there as soon as I got the last of it. My family has come to the conclusion that the figure we'd see in the hallway and on the stairs is that of my great-grandmother, watching over us. We didn't see that figure specifically until we put her picture up in the hallway, and we've seen a similar figure in each of the homes we've lived in since then. We've hung her picture up in each subsequent house. We still get that feeling of being watched, but it doesn't feel menacing, which is reassuring. Other than that, to this day, I'm 21 now, I have no ducking explanation for what was going on in that house. It was brand new, so nothing really should have been haunting it, unless the grounds themselves were haunted. All I know is that I never felt comfortable in that house. This experience is one I never shared with anyone besides my brother. When I was about 13 years old, I was living in rural BC. One night, I sat in the hot tub on the deck outside, gazing at the woods and soaking in the silence. It was wintertime, and we just recently had snowfall that left around knee-high snow. Around 2 to 3 a.m., an enormous wolf, far larger than any I had ever seen, suddenly emerged from the woods. I remember its coat being a shimmering silver and its bright, piercing green eyes. As this wolf was walking along the fence of our paddocks, it locked eyes with mine, and we just kind of stared at each other as he walked past me, both alone in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. What happened next till this day instantly makes my spine shiver. As the wolf walked past, he walked towards our barn with our horses in it. It became darker as it entered the barn, but the other side of the barn still had a bright light illuminating the outside that I could clearly see. This wolf, as it entered, halfway through, went from the shape of a wolf to a very large, broad-shouldered person. The horses didn't make a single sound, and this person that now stood roughly 7 feet tall rounded the corner towards the open field but didn't emerge from the other side, and I never saw it again. My brother had his own encounter with this same wolf. I'm guessing, he told me that he woke up randomly one night from the feeling of being watched. He then looked out his window to see a very large wolf walking away from his window, so I'm guessing it was watching him sleep. This place we lived at was old native ground. Our barn was an old schoolhouse where the Catholic priest would put the native children and teach them lessons on Christ. It even had the old desk and chairs inside still. My brother and I both saw children's faces in the panes of glass from that barn and lights turning on randomly. We had closet doors slam repeatedly for minutes at a time, footsteps, and feelings of being watched. In my room, I saw glowing red eyes on the ceiling, and I hid under my covers till morning. Anyway, my main subject of this story and what I'm more seeking answers for is what I encountered outside in the middle of the night. After I looked around myself, the closest thing I could find was skinwalkers or wendigos, but from what I read, these creatures have deformed features or things that make them uncanny or straight up horrific. What I saw, nothing struck me as abnormal about this wolf besides its massive size, until it literally changed its entire form in front of me. There's just so much that I experienced at this property that this just scratches the surface of everything. The wolf incident is just something I've never really been able to grasp and always wanted some kind of answer because it feels and sounds unbelievable. I also understand that the term skinwalker is Navajo lore and doesn't correlate with BC tribes, but this is just a representation of what I saw with the closest accuracy. So I was on a weekend away with a girlfriend, driving back to our hotel. We were staying in the hills above a tiny country town in NSW. As we drove up a back road, by a row of what looked like low grass fields out of season, we both looked to our left. There was an animal crouched in the grass about 30 feet or so away. Close enough to see relatively well, and it appeared to be chowing down on something. It resembled a dog from a distance but was really rough looking, almost hyena-like. Its eyes were glinting. We both alerted each other to what we saw, as it didn't look like a normal-sized dog. Then what happened next is forever burned in my memory, frame by frame. The creature looked directly at us and accelerated straight towards the car faster than any dog. Faster than any creature I'd ever witnessed. It was like a bullet, and as it became more visible in the light, especially when it passed just in front, we both saw it was short-legged and very long-backed, but slender, lean, and muscled with a long snout and rows of very visible, sharp teeth. And it was so freaking fast it shocked us both. My girlfriend hit the brakes. Fully illuminated by the beamers for a brief moment, its body alone was as long as the front of the four-wheel drive, plus its tail. But low down. Twice or more the size of a large dog, but as I said, slender, lean, elongated, and short-legged. I remember thinking in the moment, how can that body sprint so fast? It had rough, short hair and some striping on its back and rear sides. I remember it so well, such was its impression, size/length, and speed. It seemed super aggressive, as if it were trying to attack. We thought we'd hit it as it ran so close, but the thick and tall bushes and saplings on the other side of the road were pummeled down in an instant. A powerful creature, no doubt. We both looked at each other, and neither of us even considered getting out. Quite frankly, we were both in shock and had the quivers that night. The next night we ventured down to the only pub in the village, passing the grass field that had sheep grazing in it, and told our story, trying to make some sense of what we'd seen. "Oh, you saw the creature," the landlord replied. "It's very rare to see it, but it's happened a few times before, over the decades." At that point, the only other two patrons' ears pricked up, and we were pretty heavily questioned about what we had witnessed. "And I kid you not," the landlord said as we were leaving, "you were wise not to get out of the car. The best description I can give is that it really looked like a bizarre cross between a Tasmanian tiger and a freaking werewolf. It certainly wasn't a wolf, a dog, or a dingo. It still gives me shivers now." I have lived in Norwich, Connecticut, for about 8 years now, altogether. I am usually a skeptic about the paranormal, trying my hardest to find logical answers. I try not to let my mind believe that there could be more sinister forces in our world than it may seem on the surface, but I still have no idea how to explain this. It happened about 4 years ago. I had just moved back in with my mother after living with an aunt due to familial issues. Me and my childhood best friend had been hanging out in my bedroom playing Borderlands 2, and we had been up late trying to grind for legendary gear to use against Terra Mophbus. We had played for about 3 hours straight, and it was about midnight when we decided to ask my older cousin if she wanted to walk outside with us through the neighborhood. This wasn't something we had never done before. We loved walking outside at night. No cars to stop us from walking in the road, no one to judge us for laughing loudly and making bad jokes. This night, though, something different happened. My cousin said she would come with us, and we all got ready. For the first 10 minutes everything was normal. We were walking and listening to music on my friend's Bluetooth speaker. It wasn't until we got to the road leading to another part of my neighborhood that things felt off. My friend had been charging his speaker for hours before we left, but after we turned onto this road, it just turned off and wouldn't turn back on. It wouldn't even make the beep noise most Bluetooth devices make when you turn them on to pair with something. We were confused but not scared yet. We kept walking for maybe another 5 minutes before I realized none of the street lights were on. I had pointed it out to the two with me, and it seemed to really scare my cousin. She began saying how she felt like we weren't supposed to be there and needed to go back home. Me, however, wanting to show off my friend, said we should keep going and that the city probably just needed to fix the street lights. It was just when I said that did I notice, farther down the road, a street light was on. One single light. That wasn't the worst part though. When we looked under the street light, there was an all-black shape dancing under the light. If you can even call what it was doing, dancing. It waved its arms through the air slowly and methodically, twisting and turning its whole body as it took big, wide steps. Never leaving the light. It was almost as if it wanted us to see it. My cousin let out a blood-curdling scream as my friend threw his speaker on the ground, and we all ran away. Sprinting back the whole way. After we all got home, I bent over and threw up in the front yard. My cousin was hysterical, sobbing loudly and uncontrollably. My friend was pale white, trying to force himself not to puke as well. We all agreed what we saw wasn't normal. I have never set foot on that road at night since, and if I have to go out at night, I always take the long way to the main road. I still have no idea what that was that we saw, but I'm not brave enough to go searching for answers I don't really need. My daughter had been in a coma for months with some in-depth neurological trauma. After waking up and being medically cleared, we were moved to inpatient rehab that provided separate housing for parents of patients. She was 17 months old, and I stayed inside of the rehab facility as often as I could with her, sleeping on chairs, etc., when staff allowed it. There was one charge nurse in particular that didn't allow parents to stay, so I had to walk to the parent housing and sleep there for the evening. It was a much older, dorm-style, open bunk room with probably 12 beds. I was the only parent who had stayed that evening. I was poor and most other parents could afford hotels. It was 3 a.m., and I woke up to noise in the area around me, an eerie scratching sound, but it was all around me. Above me, below me, in front of me, extremely hard to pinpoint. The only light was coming in from the street light outside, illuminating the ground in front of the windows over the end of the beds. Directly in front of my bed, a small figure stood up. It was a small girl with dark hair and was extremely frail looking. I remember knowing that at that moment, She was not real or alive. You could just tell. There was no moment where I thought she was a patient that had wandered up. It's a locked facility anyway. There was absolutely no confusion that I was looking at a living, breathing child. She stared at me for what seemed like hours, and I couldn't speak. She put her little hand on the rail at the end of my bed and then, poof, gone. In front of my eyes, she disappeared. I was not asleep. I was a smoker in those days and immediately went out into the smoker's area and had a puff. I initially had written it off as my mind being overstressed, but I mentioned it to a day nurse that I had developed a friendship with, and she told me I was not the first parent to relay this story. In fact, she described the little girl to me without me mentioning features at all. That was almost 20 years ago, and I can vividly remember it. I saw the devil itself. I was 12 years old. We shifted and settled in our new home. Due to my father's job issue, we had to change cuties. We are a religious family. My parents went for Hajj in 2016. Those 6 months were really sad for me, as I missed them. But when they came back, something was off about them. My mom always stayed in bed and never got up. Couldn't even properly eat food. Me and my sister got very concerned. We consulted a doctor, and they said that the medicines my mom was taking regarding her periods and her hormones were all in a mess. They prescribed some medicines and said she'd get better. But she didn't. I remember vividly I made food, did my house activities, and made a tray to give dinner to my mom and dad. Dad also came home from work and was just chilling. When they were done with the meal, I cleaned up and went to bed. 16th of June 2017, time, 3:15 a.m. I heard a scream. It was loud, and it sounded like pure terror, like when you were in severe pain and you just scream from it. It felt like that. I woke my sister up. She said it must be the neighbors relaxing. They might be fighting sleep. You have school tomorrow. Something didn't feel right, but I put my fingers in my ear, curled up in a ball, and somehow slept. In the morning I made breakfast and went to school. When I returned, I found my father at home. He never left. He said mom wasn't well, so he had to be with her. Again, I didn't think much of it. The date was 19th of June 2017. Around 7 p.m. I made a tray of food to give to my parents. That's when I heard my mom make a weird guttural sound. She started laughing very loudly and started making fun of my father and me. At one point she says, "It hurts. It hurts really bad. Just kill me or break me already, I can't do this." Then next thing you know, she's saying, "You're a ducked up man, I'll kill you, why don't you kill me, ha, you asshole." It felt as though two distinct personalities were present within her. My father grabs my hand, pushes me out of the room, and locks the door. I'm shocked and totally stoic, as I didn't know what to do or what to believe. That WTF just happened. My sisters weren't at home. I was all alone. I couldn't hear anything from my parents' room. I just went upstairs and stayed there. This went on for a while. We would hear screams, cussing, crying, and laughing. Sometimes it would happen 3 or 4 times a week, or sometimes twice a week. I soon realized my mom isn't sick, there is something hurting her, but I'd why. So a month goes like this. My dad gets in contact with a Pir Baba, a very holy/religious person. They said they needed the youngest in my house to talk to the other celestial beings as they tend to get attached to them. I was the youngest in my house. All my other sisters were in their early 20s. I'll skip the part about preparation and the whole instructions thing, fast forwarding to the part where they used me as a means to communicate with the other things. I like to call them beings, so I'll refer to them like that. As soon as I met them, my mom started shaking and started laughing like a maniac and kept saying, "Don't go, don't go. Don't go. Go back or it'll kill you." We started the ritual in what they want from us? Why are they hurting my mom? Who sent them? What do they need? Yay, some family drama came out. We found out someone was jealous of my mom, so they did black magic on her for many years, and now those beings want to take my mom's soul and kill her, eat her alive, ruin her, and curse her children's lives. Satanic, yes. So they are asking questions, I'm asking them from the beings, and they reply to me. At first there was a black veil on their faces, but when they realized we wanted to kill them as they were hurting us, holy shit, they started effing with my mind, like showing me illusions that I'm somewhere else and showing me how they kill people. Then they started giving me visions of the person who did the black magic. The Pir Baba started grabbing them and killing them, and I was some kind of vessel and also a mean to show them where they were. I wonder how he did that. But yeah, all this is happening. My mom is shaking and screaming like crazy. We had to tie her down to the sofa to stop moving so much. On the other hand, my mind was going crazy from seeing so much weird stuff that I couldn't tell what was real and what was not. I saw one of those beings turn around and look dead straight in my eyes, smiling that went from ear to ear like a literally wide smile. Its eyes were black, and then its face was twisted in an upside-down way. Like, I'd how much more to explain. And that being said to me, "You can't catch us," and then it vanished. When the whole ritual was over, I just felt like a robot. I couldn't talk properly. My shoulders and back were stiff as hell because the ritual went for 6 hours straight. Things after that got better. The beings who vanished and we tried killing, yes, they called their buddies, ganged up on that Pir Baba and killed him, and he died 3 days after our ritual. Yikes. Yeah, as for Mom, she did get better but needed time to heal. There was another whole process, but I'll skip that. As for me, I got to a state where I could see these beings at night when it's dark. As I was used as a vessel. They could see me, and they knew I could see them, so they used to annoy me for fun. I got so scared of the dark that I had to sleep with all the lights on. I'm better now they don't annoy me, as I know how to deal with them, and yes, my mom is better as well. So this is my story. All true, no cap. This is my uncle's story. My uncle is the one who knows a lot and is very good when it comes to cars, weaponry, hunting, etc. This story he told me took place a couple of years ago, as I'm not sure when this happened. Here goes. One night some time back, probably the early 2010s, my uncle and aunt were in bed late at night and sleeping. They have 2 dogs outside who bark aggressively at anything they see as a threat. On this particular night, they were raising hell. So, my uncle gets up and is aware something isn't right. I mean, what could possibly be causing this type of disturbance in the middle of the night besides a deer, dog, or maybe an intruder? Anyways, my uncle grabs a simple .22 rifle and heads outside to see what in the world is going on. He heads up to the dog lot, and the dogs are very feisty. He looks around and doesn't see anything. Until he looks up. Their dog gate has a sort of frame around it, and squirrels climb on it all the time. Sitting on that frame, he described it as a creature that had a cat's head, a mouse body, and some other rodent body parts on it. The thing looked him straight in the eyes in evil. He quickly shot the terrifying thing twice while it was still looking at him in the eyes, and it barely flinched. It yelled and ran off. He never saw it again. I swear, it had to have been something religious or something just too gruesome to fathom because he researched and never found anything even hinting at what he saw that night. Nothing like that night has happened ever since, and I hope nothing like that happens to anyone in this scary world of ours. I was driving home from a friend's house when I was 17. It was mid-July, hot as absolute hell, hazy, and there was no breeze to help. I was about 2 miles from my home on a dirt road. I was driving slowly because my windshield was foggy, no AC, and the deer were a problem because the bugs were driving them out of the woods. A white, wispy figure crossed the road about 50 feet in front of me. I stopped because whatever it was, I didn't want to hit it. I looked at it, not sure what it was, then it looked back at me. Once I saw it had eyes and it wasn't a solid thing, it freaked me out pretty bad. It just dissipated like cigarette smoke. I'm telling myself it was just fog or whatever, but I knew it was more. I was freaked out. Normally I would have just gone downstairs to my room when I got home. My dad was an insomniac and slept when he could in the recliner in the living room. I wouldn't want to disturb him. Insomnia is awful. I went up there to see if he was awake because I wanted to tell him what I saw. I could peek in there, and if he was awake, I'd tell him. I didn't see him in the recliner, so I looked around the corner. He was face down on the floor. I called an ambulance, and they took him. He had a major heart attack. 100% he would have died if I hadn't gone upstairs to tell him about the figure in the road. When I was maybe 7, my younger sister, 4 at the time, went missing. My father was petrified, our whole neighborhood was searching, the police were already involved. I went across the street and a couple blocks down to our babysitters to see if she was there. She wasn't. As I began walking home, a boy my age came up to me. He was really friendly and nice. Boys my age weren't welcoming to me, and I was confused as to why I felt so relaxed around this stranger. I asked him who he was, and he said he was in my math class. I was stumped. In my grade, we had the same class/teacher the whole day, so it's not like students would join us for different subjects or we would get a different teacher, like what high school was. But he insisted he was in my math class. I remember he had shaggy black hair, and he was smiling a lot. It was really calming walking with him. I told him about my sister missing, and he told me to check the couches on the stairs landing. I asked how he knew about the couches in the building, and he said he had been playing in there before too. The couches were a stack of 2 that someone had left on the very top floor landing in our apartment, and we were always told not to go near them because they could fall and hurt us. The way they were stacked, one couch was on its legs, and the other couch was upside down with the back of the couch against the legs. We walked back to the apartment building, and I opened the front door for the kid, and he's gone. Just gone. He's not walking away, he's not walking down the block, he's not standing across the street. I was talking to him just as I reached for the door, and then he wasn't there. I walked up to my dad, and I told him to check the couches. He insists he already has, but I keep bugging him. He checks again, and this time he finds my sister wedged in the crack between the legs and the back of the couches. She couldn't yell for help or hear anyone looking for her. She was totally fine after, but that was a super scary experience. I'll never forget that boy. I used an Ouija board for a couple days in a row with a friend of mine and had some unpleasant experiences afterwards. My room and basement became highly volatile environments, and I had increasing trouble getting myself to even go down there due to whispers, poking, and prodding, all the shadows I would see. It started to get bad when I was walking up the stairs alone, and I could hear footsteps running behind me up the stairs. The first 2 times it happened, my mom didn't believe me, and I was forced to keep sleeping downstairs. Then one night, I was standing beside my bed trying to convince myself I wasn't scared, and I felt a grasp around my ankle from under the bed. I quickly jumped up on the bed and sat cross-legged and said out loud, "This is my room. You don't scare me," trying more to convince myself than anything. I then watched as my pajama pant leg, which was laying flaccid across my ankle, lifted straight up into the air so the bottom of my pant leg was taut against my leg, suspended upwards like a tent. I took this warning very seriously and sprinted up the stairs, crying to my mom. She let me sleep upstairs that night due to my level of hysteria. The next morning I was getting ready for school. I had to go back downstairs to get changed. As I came back up the stairs, the running footsteps started again, only this time my mother was in the same room as the stairs, so she heard it. She was angry because I had brought the spirit in with the Ouija board, so she had very little sympathy and instructed me to get my shoes on to go to school regardless of my hysterics. My shoes were tucked in a bottom cubby in our shoe closet, so I bent down to grab them, and a large glass lid from one of the boiling pots we kept on the top shelf of the closet came flying down, missed my head by maybe an inch, and broke 2 of my toes. My mom watched all of this happen and decided I wasn't going to school that day. She had to bring in multiple teams of paranormal investigators, a couple priests, and adopt a strict cleansing routine, but we never really got rid of whatever it was. It just lingers in the basement. We were told in this process that our basement has 2 rifts or portals that they described as portals to hell. The negative spiritual energy never dies in that house. I have never spoken of what happened to me as a child. It took over 40 plus years to utter a word to another human being. Tonight is the first time I typed this out, so please bear with me. It will seem absolutely absurd, and I've felt all my life that not another living soul would ever believe me. How could anyone believe what I myself have questioned now for over 50 years? This happened to me, it is 100% true. It was sometime around 1971? It was midwinter on Long Island. My parents kept me upstairs in their bedroom as a baby, up until I was a toddler. Basically, until I was old enough to be in a twin bed in my own room. They had their home built to specifications back in the 1950s. Of course, being who they were, they designed the entire second floor of the house to be their domain. When you reached the top of the stairs, it had a door that opened. You walked into an open room with bookshelves on the entire back wall, and a bench sat to your left, sort of like a library area, where encyclopedias were kept and more. Walking through past the wall of books was their bedroom door, and the other door to the immediate left was my dad's office. Their bedroom was absolutely huge. When you walked in, their master bath and walk-in closet side were on the right wall, and it was a long wall with a big shelf between the 2 doorways, which held their television set and clock radio. The back wall faced the backyard with a huge picture window in the center. This is exactly where my crib sat, directly in the middle of the window. I remember a lot of moments when I was a baby. I know it might sound weird, but it's something I retained. I can't remember what I had for lunch today, but I remember many things from my childhood. I literally recall being frustrated not being able to explain things sometimes. I must have been around 2 or 3 years old. I would wake up in the very early morning and go underneath the huge shade and look out the window. I can still recall how cold the glass felt to my little fingers and the smell and wetness from the condensation. I would retract my hands from the glass, make handprints. I would play and look at the fog low to the ground, look at the grass, the back shed, and my mother's purple lilacs. I was usually put to bed early. I remember this one particular night. The room was dark, only the moonlight from the window peered into my crib. I was on my back. Something woke me up in the darkness. I could hear glasses clinking and voices coming from downstairs. Loud voices and laughter. I was laid down facing my parents' walk-in closet. The door was usually closed. This night, it was left ajar. I was so little, I was a baby. A toddler. Helpless. I awoke, and my little eyes opened. The moonbeam peered through the glass as the shade wasn't quite all the way down. I was suddenly afraid, very afraid. I remember this. Still to this day. I don't understand or know how or why, but I do. Suddenly, a hand appeared out of the darkness. The more it moved towards me, the more the light of the moon exposed this very large, malformed hand. It wasn't normal. It had super long fingers with these wobbly, oversized knuckles. The skin was now what I came to know as the color green. Or maybe the moonlight gave it that appearance? I'll never know, but I was terrified. It moved, and I couldn't see anything behind it. Not a body or a face, but I didn't want to see. I was petrified into silence, and it moved closer. It had nails with what now I would perceive to be blood all over them because the nails appeared to me in color. What I learned later was red. My mouth moved, but nothing came out. Until finally I heard my own voice. I somehow knew I had to scream as loud as I could. They had to hear me. Please hear me, please hurry. Now. I didn't know these words probably, but as a small child I knew I needed them. Lights on, the door to open, and big people to come help me. It drew closer. It couldn't have been more than 2 feet away at this point. I heard what I now would describe as a low hum like radio waves. No breathing or anything, just this annoying humming sound that bothered my ears. I let out another blood-curdling scream. One between every breath. I crawled as far as I could to get as much distance as I could, but the bars on my crib stopped me, and I was too afraid. I was cornered. I heard a rumbling of something coming up the stairs out there in the hallway. Mommy. It was still there. I saw this thin, clear as day, and I will never, ever not believe that this wasn't real. It was real. I never needed light and people so bad in my life. I knew somehow this was bad, this was evil, and if it got to me, I was gone. Bad. Very bad. As soon as the sound of the doorknob twisted, it retracted back into the darkness, and this hand slowly disappeared. It's like slow motion. The lights came on, and it was the first full breath I took, that wasn't wailing, and I recall both my parents there. I also remember other people. I guess they had company and were having a good time. Oh well, they never knew what happened to me. Only that I was crying hysterically and pointing at their closet emphatically and wouldn't stop. I also wouldn't stay in that room. I clutched onto my father, I do remember that. I wouldn't let go. I recall them giving each other a look unbeknownst to their friends, and I know this sounds unbelievable, but I knew they got it, they knew something was off. They took me downstairs, and I remember being in the living room with them and them laying me on the couch. It's a blur after that, but this happened to me, and it was so traumatic that after all these years I can still recount every single detail. I was no more than 3 years old. How is this possible? I remember feeling the chill of the glass and the coolness when my tiny arm reached behind me, when I was attempting to move backwards in my crib. I know evil exists, I have more experiences, but perhaps another time. I am grateful though. Grateful my mother was a very spiritual woman. When my mother had a feeling. Or a dream? You listened. My father would never speak of such things, but when my mom said something, he paid attention and always listened. He didn't mess with her, he was smart that way. She was a special lady. Her sixth sense was uncanny. She never shrugged off something if something happened to me. In fact, most of the time she'd react before I could even say anything. I know what I saw was real. I'm 55 years old now, and I still can describe it perfectly. The story I am about to tell happened around 2005. I was working at a Freddy's Frozen Custard in my local town, where I also attended college. In one of my classes at the college, I had met a girl, let's name her Becca for the sake of the story. One night, I was working the closing shift at work, and Becca decided to stop in an hour before we closed and hang around, talking to me. Well, close time comes, and she decides she wants to hang out after I get off, so I told her to wait outside at one of the tables until then. I finally close and meet her outside. We talk for a bit, and then decide to go walking. I knew of a golf course that I had been to a couple weeks back at that time, at night too with a group of friends. So we both agreed to go and walk the area and talk, with it being around midnight at this point. We both got to the golf course and walked on the sidewalks that led around the course, just talking and getting to know each other. Eventually, our topic of discussion turned into ghost stories that we both had experienced personally. We walked around the course and reached a spot on the sidewalk where we could walk through local neighborhoods nearby to the side of us or keep going straight. Now, the sidewalk we walked on led into a wooded area. I should mention that the whole sidewalk around the course had lamp posts, It started getting wooded at a certain point on both sides. There weren't any more lamp posts beyond the beginning of the tree lines. We decide to detour into the neighborhoods, walking and discussing our horror stories. After about an hour of this, we get back to the point of the sidewalk on the course where we can either turn right and go back to our cars on a lit sidewalk or turn left into the dark, wooded, creepy sidewalk half. We decided to take a left. We continued talking, but at this point, I can't remember what the topic was because I suddenly became aware of how creepy and dark this part of the course was. Just lines of trees on both sides of us. Becca kept mainly talking, but we reached a point where we both stopped to turn back, and that's where I really got on edge. As soon as we stopped, I heard a couple of footsteps to the tree line beside us. I start to freak out on the inside as I gain a sense of something stalking us, watching us. We had been walking into this part for about 10 minutes now, and Becca seemed oblivious to the outside footsteps. I didn't say anything, and we turned around to head back to our cars. Now I was completely focused on whatever was on the other side of the tree line. I knew it was following us because, at one point, I stopped her and I from walking and heard the footsteps again. They stopped a couple steps behind ours. She said what, and I said, "Oh, nothing." And we kept walking, finally clearing into the lit part of the sidewalk after a couple minutes. I tried peering through the tree line at times to try and see feet, but I never did. I looked back after getting into the lit part of the sidewalk, but whatever had stalked us the entire time stayed back at a certain point, and I didn't dare go past the tree line to the side to see if I could see it. There was an open field to the other side of the tree line. I don't think I told Becca what I heard that night, but it has always been a memory and one of my freakiest experiences I've had thus far. It may have been a dog, cat, or something else, but either way, I didn't want to personally find out. My grandfather was not a good man, and he died when I was an infant, so I don't really have any living memories of him, only what I've been told and when he shows himself. For the sake of anonymity, we will refer to him as Ivan. Ivan had been one to inherit his family farm that had been running for generations, as far back as it being a bought colonized settlement stealing native land. I have reason to believe he had a lot of pride in it for how long he has clung to it as a ghost. He was arrogant, violent, and cruel to his family. Ivan personally despised my father for shitty reasons. One of the reasons was that my father wasn't his biological son. Which, by the way, none of us found out until my father was 50 years old. I'm not sure how he found out. I assume my grandmother somehow slipped up what she hid from my father and was cornered into telling the truth, but I don't talk to my dad anymore, so I'll never know how he figured it out. My grandmother, let's call her Penny. She had met some guy who was a country musician sometime before 1960. The guy was apparently extremely violent, and Penny's parents did the scaring off of the country boy. In the end of that toxic short-term relationship, which I believe she would have been 21 and pregnant with my dad, for some reason though, my dad's birth father would send gifts for many years for my dad's birthday. Penny would not give them to my dad, and she instead hid them all in an attic to collect dust for several decades. I don't know how she met Ivan or when she got with him exactly. Ivan and Penny had kids together, 2 boys, Austin and Mike. Ivan treated my father and Austin like absolute shit. Mike wasn't born until they were at least roughly teenagers. My father would always claim how he had things worse and how I should be grateful he doesn't be an even bigger piece of shit than he already was. I believe Ivan liked to beat my father with metal tools and work them to his bone on the farm. While at the same time Ivan was beloved by the small town community near the farm. They believed him to be an amazing Christian father who helped take care of everyone. The family farm wasn't wealthy at this time but had influence in the community. Austin being younger and Ivan's firstborn, but he got a lot of abuse from him as well. I think he was treated slightly better since he got to pursue his own interests as an artist. My uncle's illustrations were on the walls of Penny's home and my father's. I never got to talk to Austin much because he ducked off as far as possible to live in New York and only visit on Christmas. I think he has a career in sculpture by repairing gargoyles there. When Mike came into the picture, I think he was only about 7 years older than my brother, so they sort of had a childhood together. From what I've heard, Ivan loved and adored Mike over everything. Mike was fun and spontaneous, which made him good at making Ivan laugh. Mike was also a spiritual person, even for a teenager. He wrote a poem about how he'd go to heaven. My dad told me about it, but I never got to read it. Mike got some of his friends to come to the farm. They had recently seen a movie called Teen Wolf, and there was this scene when Michael J. Fox rides on top of a car like a surfboard. Mike wanted to ride one of the farm trucks the same way to be just as wild and free. His friends got in the truck and picked a road for a perfect place to pull this stunt. Mike stood on the hood of the truck while one of his friends sped down the road. I'd like to think Mike wasn't afraid of the rush and what he didn't see coming. His friend hit the brakes, and Mike flew off the hood and slammed his head into the road, dying on impact. There was nothing anyone could do, and a hole in the family was left by Mike. I never met Mike, but the feeling of his absence held strong in my family. Ivan blamed my father for Mike's death, and their abusive dynamic became even more turbulent since now my father was now a dad with my brother and eventually me. He wanted to secure inheriting the farm no matter how badly Ivan treated him. Ivan made an ultimatum for my dad to take our family to leave for good or else. My father had a few days to get our SHT together and leave, but unusual circumstances would strike. With only 2 days before my father wouldn't be in the inheritance for the farm, Ivan dies abruptly from being electrocuted. He was working on a water pump, but somehow forgot to turn off important switches on the power box nearby. The small town near us mourned him, but definitely not my family. My father claimed an alibi of being at another nearby town getting supplies, but I don't think it would be hard to fake. We were so far away from any emergency responders it would take 30 minutes to get to the farm, and that's if you know where you're going on the country roads in the 90s. That would easily turn into an hour to just get someone over there. My father was the one to discover Ivan's body as well. I can't say for certain if he hid out of sight to pull a switch for murder or if he really went out to town. My father would point out to me the place he found him by the well water pump and the power box Ivan forgot to turn off. The way he would say it with distant satisfaction stuck with me. Ivan didn't part ways from the farm after his death. My brother was the first to see him being about 12 years old, maybe. It was in the middle of the night staying at our Grandma Penny's that my brother was woken up by the sounds of snoring. When he looked to where the sound was coming from, he saw Ivan glowing blue and sleeping in his reclining chair. Ivan didn't disappear, but my brother hid under the blankets to get back to sleep. I think my father fully believes Ivan haunting the farm, but he didn't share any stories I recall except there being something about pasture gates moving, I think. Penny, strangely, is in complete denial of Ivan lurking on the farm. She's always been cold, and I'm not sure if she loves anyone at all, so I know it's not because of mourning. Writing all of this out, I could see her being suspect too now. Penny values family sticking together no matter how bad it is for reputation. I can absolutely see her taking matters into her own hands to keep her family in the farm housewife way. Pulling a switch isn't hard. I don't talk to her anymore either. The first time I encountered Ivan, I was also about 12 years old. There were some horses that didn't belong to us wandering around the front of Penny's house. She got up to go try to move them somewhere, and I sat on the ground of the front porch to watch. I think I was there for a few minutes with the front door behind me. I heard this angry guttural male voice yell from behind with a cold wind rushing through me coming from the door. I of course screamed, running away to go help Penny with the horses. I tried to tell her what happened, and she flat denied it, saying it was just the wind. No wind was hitting me from where I was sitting, and the direction was the door. Closed doors don't exactly blast cold winds with voices through them in summer. I also think from the mirror trauma story it was Ivan that I saw being the old man peeking at my bedroom door that night. In summary, I heard him moaning in the hall of our house, and I decided to look. He stood there by my bedroom door that had been opened wider than I had it. Ivan had bony features with a long frame leaning over. His hair and beard were straight and scraggly like straw, and his eyes were sunken but piercing. Ivan had the same colors of glowing blue like my brother described, but I saw mixes of orange smearing like paint in the outlines of his features. The last instance I saw Ivan was when I was running around with my old best friend on the farm during the day. I think we were maybe ghost hunting because I was already under the impression of the farm being paranormal, but it's been too long either way. We were up to dumb preteen stuff. There's this old white paint chipping shack filled with junk and falling apart behind Penny's house. I remember us laughing about something, and then we both just stopped whatever we were doing when we saw the shack. It's never bothered me before until then. The old shack has a dusty window that has a few things in the way but you can kind of see inside, but at that moment Ivan's face was clear behind the blurry glass. He wasn't glowing but was more clearly pale-skinned with grayed hair. Ivan's eyes were empty sockets yet somehow looked so angry at us. My old best friend saw him too because she screamed before I did. My brother was out on a tractor nearby. My friend and I darted across fences and pastures to get to my brother's tractor. It pissed my brother off because we could have been run over, but he let us cram in there to ride with him while moving the tractor to feed cattle. I had actually forgotten about it for some time because of how bad his appearance scared me, and my brother mentioned how we acted weird one day, quiet and shook up from something insisting we stay on the tractor. Beyond that, I haven't seen any more of Ivan, and I'm glad not to. Probably because I haven't stepped foot on that place in 10 years. My brother told me a few years back Ivan had shown up in a dream begging him to come back to the farm. It's fallen apart since I left. The farm sure as heck is haunted, if not cursed. When I was younger, I would regularly have difficulty sleeping because I felt as though there was something directly outside my window watching me. Now a bit of background. I lived in a rural part of New Mexico in an area just outside of Farmington known as Crouch Mesa. Picture a trailer park in the middle of the desert with no real organization or boundaries. Just trailers and random dirt lots for miles. My house was surrounded on the back side by juniper trees, with the front of the house facing the only main road. My room was on the back side, so outside of my bedroom window all I could see was juniper. Most of them were in a kind of line at the edge of the dirt lot, but there was this one that stuck out a little more than the rest. It was all mangled and dead on the top half and was honestly very menacing looking. It started when I was about 6 or 7. I woke up one night with chills running down my spine. I look out the window next to my bed and see that mangled tree protruding into our dirt yard and feel that lingering, nagging feeling that someone, unseen, is watching me. It was incredibly dark that night, and I recall struggling to even see the tree, even though it was a few feet outside my window. However, I could barely make out what appeared to be glowing eyes, like an animal gets when you shine a flashlight or something in their eyes. They were standing just behind and above the shrubby tree. Naturally, I was absolutely petrified. I couldn't move. I could hardly breathe. I just lay there staring into these eyes. Almost transfixed. And they are out there staring right back at me. The next morning I try to tell my dad about what had happened. Trying to calm me down, he takes me to the tree in the daytime and shows me how it's all dead on top, and that's probably why it looks so scary at night. This is able to ease my fears, and those eyes didn't cross my mind again until a year or two later, when I wake up in the middle of the night with a similar chill and those eyes staring at me again. This time I try to stay a bit more calm and rational, trying to remember that it's just a dying tree that looks creepy at night. I get up out of bed and go to my window, peering through the dark, trying to determine the source of the eyes. Even though I knew for a fact that my mind had to be just playing tricks on me, I simply couldn't shake that being watched feeling. So I just sat at my window, locked in a staring contest with a pair of unknown eyes. At this point, I start to notice it happening more frequently. It was a couple years between my first and second encounter with them, but after that, it would only be a month or two before I'd see them again, and each time they would have the same effect on me. I would be transfixed. Unable to break eye contact for fear that if I so much as blinked something would happen. Fast forward a few years when I'm about 12 or 13. I'm seeing them almost every week at least once, and after a while I stopped being scared of them. If anything, I was more pissed that they would upset my sleeping schedule because I would always wake up in the middle of the night with chills and be unable to get back to sleep. Then one night I had had enough. I woke up again, and after an angry kind of fit, I decided I'm going to open the window and yell at this thing to duck off. As I open my window, however, they dart off and disappear. Now the fear is back on. This thing that I had convinced myself was totally in my head had just taken off running. The next night I see it again, and this time I decide, duck this, I'm going to go sleep on the couch. I can't deal with this thing staring at me all night. As I get up to go to the living room, I see the eyes move and follow me. Once I'm in the living room, I glance out the window and see that they have followed me to this side of the house, and now they're closer. As if standing just inside the yard as opposed to just past the tree line. At this point, I'm terrified. I run to my dad's room and wake him up. He was very upset by this, saying I'm too old to be pulling this crap and I need to go back to bed now. This thing torments me for another year or so before my dad and I have a falling out and I move in with my mom. Move on to now. I'm 21 and haven't lived in Farmington, nor have I thought about the eyes in a long time. I believed at the time that I, in fact, had conjured the eyes out of my own childish imagination. I go back to visit my dad for Christmas, we're cool again, and we get to talking about insomnia. I mention how I think a lot of my insomnia issues come from the made-up phantom that lived behind the mangled tree at the old trailer in Crouch Mesa. He asks me what I mean exactly, and I go into full detail about the experiences. About halfway through, he turns pale white and stops talking. I ask what's wrong, rather concerned myself, and he says, "When we lived out there, I was sweet on this girl and would go hang out and chill with her now and again. She was kind of weird and practiced Wicca, but she was really hot, so I kept hanging around her. One night I go over, and she's got a ring of salt on her living room floor with a bunch of candles and pumpkins and other weird shit. I ask her what she's doing, and she says she's practicing spells. Trying to be flirty, I say, well, can you make me a spell to conjure up a beautiful woman? She said yes and made a little totem thing out of tissue paper or something and told me to hold on to it while she said something that I assume is Wiccan. She then tells me that in order for it to work, they have to bury it. And me and her decided to bury it under that mangled tree. I've been thinking about it ever since, and I'm seriously freaked out. I'm still in Farmington for the holidays, and while my dad doesn't live in the trailer anymore, I woke up last night with those same awful chills. I don't know if it's my own paranoia or if those eyes actually belong to something all those years. This story needs background to convey some factors that were potentially involved. I suspect the events leading up to the trip to Tennessee may have had a direct relation to the severity of the phenomenon we experienced while there. If you don't care, go to Tennessee and start reading from there. TN, my new husband, Eli, and I went to a rental cabin on Bluff Mountain for a honeymoon week. I don't want to name the specific cabin in case I am not supposed to, but I will say it was very raw CKY with a raw CC-un theme. Bluff Mountain is in Pigeon Forge, outside of Gatlinburg, in the Smoky Mountains. I was living in New Orleans and had brought a double handful of freshly picked gardenia blossoms with me. It was a type of symbolic offering to the mountain for having us on such a special occasion. No rituals or anything, I simply arranged them on a wooden box with a fake bird and nest that was sitting on the top of the railing of the cabin porch and sent up feelings of gratitude and joy. We went out to eat and grab groceries. Upon arriving back at the cabin, the wooden bird box was smashed into a million pieces on the porch. It hit the ground hard to shatter so far and so thoroughly. We thought maybe a raccoon or bear. Then I noticed that there were no flowers. Maybe the wind. Leaves scattered all over the porch just like when we left made me hesitate. Gardenias aren't super light flowers, definitely heavier than the leaves I saw. More curious than anything, I looked all around the porch, stairs, and walkway. I shrugged it off until the next morning, when I went a little way down the driveway to pick some honeysuckle. About 20 feet from the porch, I glanced down and do a double take. There are my gardens, all of them. They've been piled up and squished flat as crepes. There are no shoe prints, but it took more than one stomp to flatten the pile like that. Unnerved, I walk away, wondering if the mountain didn't like my offering after all and then laughing at myself for the thought. Night 1, Eli wakes suddenly to what sounds like something big banging the support beams under the cabin. The cabin hangs off the side of a hill, so the front half is supported about 15 feet off the forest floor by giant wooden posts. They were being hit so hard that the mirror on the wall was vibrating, which frankly should be physically impossible for anyone to do. He says every time he started to drift back off, there was another bang. He gets up fully, and after one more cabin shaking bang, he decides to wake me. Apparently he was trying to see if I would wake from the banging so he would know he wasn't dreaming, but now he was 100% up. As he reaches for me, he says the loudest bang/slap came from the area between the sitting area and kitchen, right at the bottom of the bed. It was a one-room cabin. He said it sounded like a giant book getting dropped from high up, but he was looking right there, and there was nothing. This bang was definitely inside the cabin. He began frantically trying to wake me, but he said I was so deeply asleep he actually thought something was wrong with me. He said he could barely tell I was breathing. Then this strange metallic jangling sounded from behind the TV, directly across the cabin from our bed. He said it went on forever, but he was too scared to go look for whatever it was over there next to the huge windows, past the spot where the noise originated from inside. It was this insistent buzzing that finally woke me. I remember it was so hard to come back to consciousness. I felt like I was literally swimming through blackness to get back to myself. I kept asking, "What is that noise?" I thought it was an alarm someone left set. Cute. When I finally woke up enough to move and sat up to go find and smash the offending noisemaker, the trilling stopped. Groaning, I fell backwards onto my pillow. Eli starts telling me about the banging. I could tell how upset my husband was. I believed what he was telling me, but I was so numb, and out of it, I was struggling to come up with any emotional response at all. There was only this debilitating fatigue, and I fell asleep on my husband when he needed me. When a man whom I'd never seen afraid in 7 years was completely terrified, I just zonked out till morning. Normally I'm an extremely light sleeper, especially in new places. This trip, however, almost every night was like this. No sooner did I put my head on the pillow than I was swallowed by blackness. It was extremely deep sleep, but it wasn't restful. Waking up was worse. It was like falling into a coma every night and slowly reviving every morning. It, ironically, left me exhausted. Day and night too, while doing my makeup in the infamous shaking mirror the next morning, I was able to get the full story and talk to Eli about it logically. Maybe a bear was rubbing against the post? He says, it was solid bangs like a huge fist, no way a bear. And what about the one from the center of the floor? On the inside? That reminded me of that stupid alarm. I told him that I was about to disable that thing. At the exact freaking second I mentioned it, that damn noise started blaring from behind the TV again. We both jumped like rabbits and laughed nervously. Hell of a way to time it. I joked. "Honey, Looking behind the TV, I was surprised to see it wasn't an alarm clock but a landline phone. An old one with a bell buzzer, which explained the horrid noise. Of course, I had to answer it. There was a minute of silence and then bursts of static. It really sounded like someone was talking, but static was obscuring their words. I told them to move to get better reception. Is this cabin management? The silent/garbled talk continued for a while before I hung up. I was amused, honestly, especially with the way Eli was gaping at me. When I hung up, he immediately unplugged the phone and said management had both our cells, so it was probably a prank call from someone who stayed here before, but we're not playing along and ending up in a delivery scenario. Smart man. The phone stayed unplugged for the duration. That night we were in the hot tub on the deck. It was around the back, had a gazebo-type cover around 3 sides, and no lights too close so bugs wouldn't be swarming you. As we're relaxing, I'm sitting on the open end facing the enclosing wooden strips, and Eli's facing me and the forest. I kept admiring the blue light behind the enclosed end. It was large, about the size of a cantaloupe, and seemed bright, but the glow over us in the hot tub was very muted. I figured it must be LED of some sort, but I had never seen a light that shade of blue anywhere. All the other lights in and around the cabin were bright and orangey, so I remember saying how it was sweet they went all out for mood lighting for the hot tub. Eli both looked at and commented on the light as well. When we decided to get out for the night, the light blinked on and off in what looked like a purposeful sequence before shining a few more seconds and going dark. We commented that it was strange how the light burned out like that and how we were sad to lose our mood lighting. I decided to call the next morning for a bulb. When I woke up, I first walked around the rear of the cabin to see what type of pole or other fixture was the one we needed serviced. There was no pole, fixture, or any other light source behind the hot tub. No cables, no wires. The main office later confirmed the instability of the soil back there prevented anything that wasn't heavy duty from being installed, so no lighting was ever put back there. Whatever that light was, we both saw it, and it was apparently just eavesdropping because we were out there for about 2 hours, and so was it. And if it wasn't turning off or burning out, that means it was straight up disappearing. Starting this second night, after coming in, my skin started to crawl, and every hair on my body stood on end every time I passed the open bathroom. The bathroom was next to the bed area. Laying in bed, you could see the bathroom sink and the small window above it. The window had no curtains as it faced into the woods behind the hot tub. At this point, I still thought the blue light was man-made, yet I could swear there was something looking in the window. I'd been leaving the bathroom door open because I liked looking out on the forest from the bed, but now I tried to keep it shut without Eli noticing I was being weird. Eli told me the next morning that every time he started to drift off, a resounding bang on the posts under the cabin would jolt him up. He said he was freaked out because no matter how long or short a time he waited to lay his head down, it was like whatever it was knew exactly what he was doing even though he never got out of bed. Once again he was wide awake and terrified, and nothing he could do would rouse me even the slightest. Night 3, after scrubbing ourselves as best we could in the highly stinky sulfuric water of the cabin, we were getting ready for bed. Walking from the bathroom to the bed, I realized I forgot to shut the bathroom door. Since Eli was already lying in bed looking at me, I just kept on toward my side of the bed, telling myself to stop being ridiculous, even though I could swear at that moment something was looking in that window. I had already looked out several times and couldn't see anything out of place, but I could still feel it. Eli quietly asks me if I can shut that door. Why? Because that window gives me the creeps. Talk about validation. That night I had some disturbing dreams, but I can't remember them. Eli, however, suffered a severe bout of SP that night, although he swore it wasn't SP because he says he sat up, kicked, and yelled at her. Now, however, he says it was probably SP. Either way, he woke up to eerie laughter and saw what he described as a grudge-type woman standing at the end of the bed laughing at him. I wouldn't wake. He said she wore a white dress, had pale skin, black eyes, and a horrible mouth, long black hair partially obscuring her face, and was surrounded by a swirling black mist. She reached for him, and he sat up, yanking his legs up to his chest. This is when he started yelling at her to GTO and kicking at her. Laughing, she faded out. He said he was woken by her grabbing his ankles and giggling throughout the night and would also wake just long enough to catch glimpses of her. I was still no help. Night 4, repeat SP experience for Eli, but he said even more intense. Same lady in white. I had also realized a trinket I brought for luck and put on the shelf next to my side of the bed was missing. It was a tiny cabin, and we tore it up looking for the next 2 days, but I've never seen it again. It was worthless except for personal reasons, and no valuables were missing, so I don't think someone came in and snagged it. Night 5, Whenever I sat up out of the water on the side of the hot tub, I started to get the same feeling of being watched I'd felt from the bathroom window. I would literally break out in goosebumps. It was Friday, and we could hear a group of educated guess here, college kids partying hard some distance out, but close enough to hear their screams, whoops, and cheers. Not wanting to give an intrepid, woods-savvy creeper a show, we went in. Not much else happened on night 5, but troubled sleep. At one point, Eli woke to frenzied banging on a support post, but it didn't last long or repeat. Night 6, final, this was an extra night we received due to the piercingly sulfuric water in the cabin. The filters needed replaced, and so they gave us a night. The water wasn't dangerous, just really, really stinky, like eau de la turd à la roton egg. Bad, and although our nights were weird, we were on our honeymoon and had just been through a tragedy. We spent our days having massive amounts of fun and doing so many awesome things, plus eating great food and drinking good wine with dinner. Glasgow is an amazing place to visit. So our last night in the hot tub. It's wonderful. Until I start feeling that intense regard from the tree line for the second night in a row. This time it's worse, I can actually feel the ill intent in this gaze. Whenever I come up to cool off, I literally find myself unconsciously wrapping my arms around myself and slipping slowly back down into the water. I remind my new husband how many years he's known me and ask how many times he has known me to be scared or paranoid. I tell him there is absolutely something aggressive in the tree line looking at me, and it is not a college kid, we can hear them again tonight. He scoots over, and I move to the covered end with him. Within 5 minutes of me moving, we hear a tremendous crashing from the brush behind us and then something big stomping around directly below us. This is followed a few seconds later by more crashing and a second pair of footsteps stomping around. They sounded like human steps, but no one could make such a loud noise on the packed earth below the raised deck and cabin. We jumped up and booked it inside, soaking wet. Eli says that night was the worst for the banging. He said there was banging on at least 3 widely separated posts, and it went on all night. He said when they did let him sleep, the woman would come. I slept like the dead, unresponsive to everything. Morning of day 7, leaving day, something was demanding my attention, pulling me back toward consciousness. At first I thought it was the mounted police or one of the mules that pulled carriages that sometimes passed my place. No, this was definitely a whole plethora of horses. Was there a parade I didn't know about? Slowly, I remembered I wasn't in New Orleans, and although what I was hearing sounded like hooves, there were no paved roads anywhere near me at the moment, just the small gravel driveway out front. Quickly snapping awake, I realized the sound was coming from the roof. I checked my phone, and it was a few minutes after 8 a.m. I groaned. Why the hell would nobody tell the roofers that the cabin was booked until 11 a.m.? I looked over at Eli. He was pale and breathing very slowly. I half-heartedly poked him a few times, but he was out. Ruefully, I thought of all he'd been dealing with while I slept as deeply as he seemed to be now and left him alone. I'd been with him nearly a decade at this point, and he had never spoken of things like this before. Whatever had been going on, he deserved sleep. At least it was roofers in the sunny morning and not weird shit at 4 a.m. At this point, it crossed my mind to wonder what roofers worked on Sundays. I listened closer. It definitely sounded slightly metallic, but I decided my initial impression held. It sounded like a horse was kicking the shit out of the cabin roof. Well, what the hell do I know about roofing equipment anyway? I'd have to ask them to stop until we checked out. I pulled back the covers and swung my legs off the bed. The instant my feet touched the floor, the pounding on the roof stopped dead, and the handle to the main door, which was about 3 to 4 steps in front of me, started jiggling violently. 2 things, there was no pause between the noises. They went from on the roof, slightly towards the opposite side of the cabin above where Eli was sleeping, to the doorknob in front of me without a time delay. Also, the top half of the door was glass with a sheer curtain, which the sun was shining directly through. I could plainly see that no one was near the door. Yet I could also see the handle rattling wildly. I yanked my feet up and dove under the blankets up to my chin like a kid, I'm ashamed to say. As soon as my feet left the floor, the doorknob stopped rattling, and the incessant pounding on the roof resumed in the same spot, again with no pause between them during the switch. I'm now staring at Eli, wondering if I should wake him. I'm scared I won't be able to, but I'm also just as nervous he'll wake up and won't hear it at all. His eyelids flutter open, taking the decision out of my hands. I ask him if he hears that and thank all the gods that he says yes. I'm hesitant to talk about the door when he just opened his eyes, so we talk about what it sounds like first. He also immediately goes to roofers. I ask if that sounds like a hammer to him. He says no, actually. We agree that it does sound like hooves or something slightly softer than metal. This whole time I realized we've automatically been whispering. And this pounding just keeps going on and on. Looking around the cabin, we see the mirror shaking, the glasses in the kitchen area rattling, and the cabinets quaking. Whatever is on the roof shook the walls of the cabin repeatedly. The pounding lasted about 35 minutes because I checked my phone right when it woke me and immediately after it stopped, from about 8:02 a.m. to 8:36 a.m., although I'm not sure how long it had been going on before it woke me. It was loud and strong and absolutely terrifying. We lay whispering for a long time. No way was this a person/people. We started thinking it, whatever it was trying to bust in through the roof, although the glass doors would surely have been easier to get through. When Eli said he was getting up to look, I told him about the doorknob shaking when I tried to get up. After a brief hesitation, he threw back his covers and sat up. The pounding stopped. He and I both froze. A terrible grating noise sliding on the roof broke the silence. We both looked at each other with big eyes and pale faces. Was that claws? I hissed in the quietest voice I could manage. He leapt back up onto the bed. The banging resumed. The quietest discussion ever followed about if we had really just heard claws up there. We thought it was exactly the sound huge claws would make, but really it could still be anything. Eli grabbed his, legally owned, firearm from his bedside drawer before quickly standing. The pounding stopped for a second to allow for another grinding rasp to sound across the roof. That is definitely ducking claws, I said. The pounding immediately resumed, twice as fast and even harder if that were possible. I could now feel the thumps reverberating through the bed. Eli told me to stay inside and listen. Whatever it was, it sounded huge, and he needed me to let him know what direction I heard it move in if it ran out of his view up there. He burst out the door and aimed his gun at the roof. The pounding stopped. There was absolute silence. There was no sound of running anywhere on the roof. And the roof didn't have a damn thing on it. In addition, being perched on the side of the hill as the cabin was, with no trees close, there was nowhere anything up there could have gone. We packed at Mach speed, but did have one last smoke in the driveway to help with the shaking and nerves. It was open, so it seemed relatively safe. While we were smoking, we could hear the people who had been partying the last few nights. They were all out yelling for a missing friend. We heard them yelling about the last time they saw him, which was apparently the night before. We could hear their panic as they screamed his name over and over. Eli and I tried to find the group to help look and ask if they had seen or heard anything weird. However, the winding one-way dirt roads were confusing, and we ended up lost. We actually think they may have been locals, and we couldn't get to them because we were on rental cabin roads, which don't connect to local roads and driveways for obvious reasons. I really hope they found him passed out drunk in a bush somewhere and regret not being able to locate them and help them look. I have no idea what this was. Nearly every major paranormal mo showed up, from orbs, weird calls, and poltergeist activity to cryptid type goings on and the lady in white, yet it all really did seem like one thing in different outfits, if you will. After coming home, we had no more weird activity at the time. I did request for the departed to stand witness from a deceased brother who owed me a favor, but I specifically requested only the blessed dead and only for the wedding ceremony. This didn't seem like protective ancestors to me, though, so I don't think it was necessarily related. I actually lean towards some type of nature or elemental type guardian spirit personally, but that is just conjecture. Although he said differently at the time, Eli now thinks it was a Bigfoot, although I think not. If you made it this far, thanks for your time to listen about my oh so memorable honeymoon. Any ideas on what we may have encountered are welcome. My grandma passed away in July 2016. I was in 5th grade, I had to be 10 or 11 years old. We started school in August, so it was only a month after she had passed. Before 5th grade, I would always take the bus home, but the school made a new rule that only 2nd graders and lower could ride the bus. 3rd grade and above had to get picked up or walk home. To this day, we don't know why they made that rule. The weird thing about it is that the school didn't warn any of the parents that this new rule would be enforced. So, I got on the bus only for the bus driver to tell me and my friends that we couldn't get on. So I called my mom and told her, and she called the school and explained that there was no warning beforehand and nobody could come pick me up till later. So the school made an exception, and they let us on the bus for that one day. I rode home with my 2 friends, and once we got off, we talked for a few minutes. One of my friends was named Holly, and she had an older sister, Amaya, in middle school that I was also friends with. My friend Jay was there too, but she got picked up as soon as we got off the bus, so I stayed with Holly and Amaya. After a few minutes, I headed home. It was hot that day. I live in Southern California, and it was during August. My grandpa already would have the door unlocked for me a few minutes before the bus arrived so I could just come in, but that day it wasn't unlocked. So I knocked, and I waited about 2 minutes before calling him to open the door. I must have called him 4 times. Now I rule out that he was sleeping because there's been several times recently where I call him while he's sleeping and he wakes up to answer his phone. I remembered that he would always leave the gate on the side unlocked, always, and through the backyard there was a key for the back door. I tried opening it, but it was no use, it was locked. I remember thinking to myself how weird that was, but I didn't care. I remember feeling tired and hot. Then I called my mom, and she didn't answer. Then I called my sister, and she didn't answer. Then I called my aunt, my other aunt, my uncle, my cousin, and a family friend. None of them answered. I started to panic a little, but then I remembered one of the windows in the front was broken, and you could easily slide it open. So I slid it open and was going to hop inside, but unfortunately I wasn't very athletic or small at that time, so I couldn't boost myself up. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I would be able to fit. So I went to my friend's house and asked Amaya and Holly to come over. I told them I couldn't get in, and if they have a bobby pin, I could try opening it. I was young and saw people opening locks with bobby pins all the time in movies, so I thought I could do it, lol. Then we all gave it a shot, and unsurprisingly, it didn't work. I then asked Amaya if she could climb through the window and unlock the door for me, and she agreed. Me and Holly helped her up before she went in there. It took about 30 seconds to a minute before she unlocked the door for me. She looked pale and kind of surprised. I remember asking her what was wrong, and she said she saw a lady in the hallway. I remember telling her it was probably my aunt, but she said no, it was an older lady. I don't know why, but my first instinct was to ask her what the lady looked like. I started describing my grandma. Glasses, black curly hair, shorts, and so on, and she said yes. Then I asked her if she saw her face, and she said no. I couldn't believe what she told me, and I just thanked her and went inside. I remember being scared, but not of what just happened. My thought was more of thinking there was a ghost in the home, child mind being scared of everything. But when I went through the hallway, I felt weirdly at peace. Which was something so rare because I've always hated the hallway. Even to this day, whenever I'm at my grandpa's, I always have to turn the lights on. What I'm about to type is something I've carried with me for the last 24 years, and I haven't really spoken much about it since I was a child, and I've never spoken about it on any kind of public forum such as this. You are free to not believe me. I, in fact, encourage you to doubt anything that you're told from anyone. I'm typing this message because, as I've gotten older and I've spent over 2 decades developing a life, to the best of my ability, I've carried an immense weight on my shoulders that neither therapist nor psychiatrist treat as anything other than a method of repressing memories at best and the delusions of a lunatic at worst. I do not blame you if you draw those same conclusions. I'm typing this in what I believe has become the most publicly traded speaking place on the internet for the sole purpose of attempting to drop the weight I've carried and move on with my life. This is more of a personal cleanse than an attempt at intrigue. I am not from here. And by here, I don't mean where I currently live. I mean where any of us live. Anyone reading this right now? It's now a few days after my 30th birthday, and this time of year always strikes me because I started kindergarten on my birthday, when I turned 5. I thought, at the time, everyone did that. You turned 5, and when you turned 5, you went to school. I didn't realize my birthday just happened to coincide with the first day of school. And a little over 1 year later, in about 2 weeks' time, it will have been 24 years to the day that my entire world vanished. I was born in San Diego and lived in a poorer suburb of San Diego as a child. I lived at an apartment complex called Lemonvine Apartments, which were a bit slummier versions of the Lemonvine apartments found in Lemon Grove, a suburb of San Diego. My parents were divorced but friendly. My mother was young when she had me, and she was beautiful. She was in her early 20s and was aspiring to be a model and would regularly take trips to LA to do photo shoots. She did glamour modeling for magazines. She had a darker skin tone, being 1/4 Indian, not native, and it gave her an exotic look. My favorite picture of her as a child was her modeling a luxurious wedding dress for a bridal company. I used to sleep with that picture when she would go to LA, and I would stay with my dad, who worked for the city of San Diego. They shared custody pretty evenly, and we even did Christmas together as a family even though they had split when I was still a baby. My dad, his girlfriend, my mom, who was single, and me. Maybe things weren't as good between them as I remember, but I was 6. So if there was drama behind the scenes, they did a good job of hiding it from me. On September 17, 1996, I was staying with my dad's parents in Riverside, California. They had a small farm where they raised chickens, pigs, and goats, no horses, sheep, or anything. But my grandma had several pet ducks that would eat seed from your hand, fly away, and return every year like clockwork. My dad had to work at night for a week, and my mom was in LA, so I stayed with my grandparents. Schools back then were pretty cool with this kind of thing, and I was sent home with the sorts of nonsense assignments you'd expect of a first grader who'd just gone back to school after summer break ended. The 17th was the third day I was staying with my grandparents, and my grandpa had told me to be careful outside because he'd seen a rattlesnake and wasn't sure where it had gone. So, since no one knew where the mystery snake had gotten off to, 6-year-old me decided to go hunting for it. In hindsight, letting a 6-year-old go looking around a farm for a rattlesnake was probably not in any Parenting 101 handbook, but it was the 90s, and I guess they didn't actually expect me to find it. There were woods on the property, but I wasn't allowed to go in there, so they probably figured that's where the snake had gotten off to. I spent all day outside playing jungle exploration on the farm, trying to track down this rattlesnake. And, much to my excitement, when I decided to open the well house, which, for those who don't have one, looks kind of like one of the green electrical boxes on the side of the road, there it was. Curled up, rattling away. I immediately slammed the door shut and ran to my grandparents' house to tell them I'd found it. Now this might be my 6-year-old memory exaggerating, but I'm pretty sure that snake was at least 900 feet long. Give or take. I found it, though. I was excited to tell my grandpa I found the snake, so he could do what he did and go out and shoot the thing. I ran in the back door of the house, which led you into the laundry room and through the kitchen. I paid no mind to anything until I turned left and entered the living room, expecting to see my grandparents, my uncle, and the neighbor couple all sat in the living room where I'd left them. Except they weren't there. And it wasn't the same living room anymore. The furniture was completely wrong. The hard and memorably uncomfortable hardwood furniture my grandpa loved so much was gone. The coffee table he made out of a tree stump was gone. Replaced by fluffy grandma-looking furniture. A 3-person sofa with a floral design on it. The TV was in the wrong place and newer than my grandpa's old sit-on-the-ground cabinet TV. The hardwood paneling on the walls was gone, or at least covered by blue wallpaper. The hardwood floor was a shaggy off-white carpet. The pictures of my dad, my uncle, me, and my grandparents were gone from the walls. Replaced by paintings and pictures of people I didn't know. As confused as I was by this, I was more confused by everyone being missing. In my 6-year-old brain, I accepted that they may have completely rearranged the house while I'd spent the day looking for a snake, but I didn't believe at all that they'd all just leave me alone. And I didn't see anyone leave. I didn't see the cars go down the road. So I walked out the front door, which was attached to the living room, as they usually are, and thought maybe they'd gone to the chickens or the pigs. Both should have been visible from the front porch, but the chicken coop was gone, and the pig pen had lost its fencing, and there were no pigs to be found. At this point I was beyond confused, and I was getting very scared. I didn't want to be alone, and I didn't see anyone. Even though they lived on a small farm, the neighbors that had been visiting lived just across the dirt road, so I ran down our own dirt driveway and across the road to their house, assuming that must have been where they went. I remember getting more and more scared as I ran to their house, and I remember starting to cry when their house was the wrong color. It wasn't the faded yellow house it used to be. It wasn't even the right house anymore. Nevertheless, I banged on the door. I remember that at this point I was crying quite profusely because I didn't understand what was happening, and I kept wiping my face, which covered it in dirt after having been digging around under stumps and logs for snakes all day. When the door opened and a woman in her late 40s to early 50s answered, and I'd never seen her before, I just started bawling uncontrollably. Everything after this point is largely a blur because nothing was right. I knew where I lived. I knew where I went to school. I knew where my grandparents lived. But I met the people who lived where my grandparents lived, and they were not my grandparents. I did not know them. I begged for them to get my uncle to tell them who I was. But my uncle wasn't there. Through a series of various police and people in suits, I was brought back to the town I lived in after spending what seemed like 10 hours in the local police station trying to contact my parents. I had my home phone number memorized, but told them my dad would be asleep. But when they called that number, the person on the other end had no idea who I was or what they were talking about. I was asked to give the police officers my address and sat in the local police station while the police in my hometown went to my address. When they finally called the station back, they were informed that the name of the apartment building was incorrect. Lemon Vine Apartments didn't exist, and the address I gave them was to an apartment complex called Merritt Manor. And the apartment number I gave them was unoccupied. I believe at this point they were operating under the assumption that I had given them the wrong name of the apartments and the wrong apartment number, but I did in fact live there. When I was finally brought to my hometown, after changing hands a couple times between police, I was asked to give the police officers my address again and was driven to where I lived. That was it, that was my apartment complex. But, just like everything else, it looked wrong. It was painted a different color, and the sign that used to have a large image of a lemon reading Lemonvine now reads Merritt Manor. I took the police to exactly where I lived, and just as they'd said, no one lived there. From this point forward, the police attempted to contact neighbors, all of whom knew me, but none of them were who they were supposed to be. Every person who came out of the apartment buildings around me were the wrong people. And they didn't know me. From this point they attempted to contact my father, which should have been easy, as he worked for the city. But no employee by his name apparently worked for the city in any capacity. As day turned to night and I spent endless hours sitting in the police station as they attempted to find any person in the world who knew me, I couldn't do anything but cry, and cry, and cry, endlessly. A woman in a suit who I think was either a detective or just someone who happened to work in the station sat with me for several hours and tried to keep me calm. She gave me a stuffed dog. A Dalmatian puppy that looked a bit like one of the dogs from 101 Dalmatians, and told me his name was Sparky. She said I could keep Sparky and that when they found my parents, Sparky would go home with me and make sure I didn't get lost again. She said he was a good dog, and he'd protect me if I took care of him. During this time, they attempted my school. I told them I went to Shawnee Elementary. It was simple to find, it was really close to where I lived. But a school by such a name, you guessed it, did not exist. My school was now apparently called Anza Elementary. At one point I was asked if the police had ever taken my fingerprints, and they had. In kindergarten, my entire class had our fingerprints taken by the police at the school gym for basically exactly this reason. Unsurprisingly, this did not help at all. They couldn't find my parents, my grandparents, my neighbors, my apartment, or even me. They couldn't even find me. I was too young to remember what my social security number was, but I severely doubt it mattered. They asked for my birthday and any relevant information that could help them figure out who I was and where I belonged, but nothing I told them turned up any information about me. At some point during the day I was briefly taken to the ER, as the police suspected I may have sustained some kind of head injury. After being looked over by a doctor, they found nothing wrong with me, and I was sent back to the police station. I ended up staying with someone that night. I'm not entirely sure who it was. Someone from Child Services, I imagine. I couldn't stop crying long enough to really focus on what was happening after this point. I'd cried myself to sleep several times in the police station and cried myself to sleep again at the house I stayed at that night, despite the woman who I was staying with, not the same woman who gave me Sparky, doing everything in her power to calm me. I clung to Sparky so hard I'm surprised I never popped his head off. I didn't have my picture of my mom. I didn't know what was going on, and no one could find out where I belonged. This didn't make sense to me. I was only 6 and just barely. I lived where I lived, and my parents were my parents, and my school was my school. They didn't just all disappear one day. In between fits of crying and waking up, I begged to go home. I begged the lady I was staying with to try and call my dad again. I just kept begging to go home. Over the next few days, I was interrogated and questioned by different people at different times at different places at all hours of the day. Police, investigators, people from departments I still don't know, child psychologists, everyone under the sun was asking me questions. I was back and forth between the police station and the house I was staying at, until eventually someone told me that they thought they'd located my parents and they were coming to get me. Finally, I was going home. Finally, this was over. Finally, I could get away from all of these strange people asking me the same questions over and over again. When the couple showed up to the police station, my heart fell into my feet as they were not my parents. But they'd had a son that had gone missing, and I fit his description pretty closely. The woman started crying when she saw me, because she immediately knew I wasn't her missing son. But I was out of tears to cry at this point. Eventually I was collected by Child Services, and I was taken to a foster family, where I stayed for a few months. The police launched a campaign, asking for anyone to come forward with information about me. They took my picture at the police station for the newspapers to put on the news. I never let go of Sparky for even a second. They didn't want me to hold him in the photo because I didn't have him when I arrived, but I needed him and would throw an immense tantrum when someone tried to take him away. They had me put back on the clothes I was wearing when they found me, but they'd since given me new clothes to wear. In those months I spent at the foster home, parents of missing children would come to the house to see if I was their child. I didn't realize this was what was happening until I was older and looked back on it. They didn't just pull me out and say, "Is this your kid?" They were a bit more subtle about it. The parents would come to meet me, and upon realizing I was not their missing child, they'd often leave in tears. Looking back at all these families that came to see me in desperation that they were going to have their child back, I feel so horrible for them. It's a feeling I can't really explain. Like a type of guilt, like I wish I had been their child so they could have them back and know they were safe. Most of those people probably never saw their children again, but I try and imagine that all of them were reunited, even though I know that isn't likely. This guilt was one of the things that kept me in therapy as an adult, but like I said, no therapist has ever bought my story or believed what I've said. The most common belief suggested to me has always been that I was abandoned as a child and lived in an abusive home, dumped on the side of a dirt road in the middle of farmland, and I repressed all the negative memories I had of my past. I didn't stay in that foster home permanently. Eventually, while my case wasn't officially closed, I needed to start going to school, and I needed identification. I was issued a birth certificate for the date that I told them was my birth year, but the day and month were listed as September 17th, the day that I was found. I never understood why they didn't just use the day and month of my actual birth, but I imagine it was because they didn't think I actually knew what it was. My name was unchanged. I started going to school sporadically. One of the child psychologists who had seen me recommended I not be placed back into a full curriculum immediately and suspected I suffered some form of PTSD. I was put in the special class and was only made to go to school twice a week initially. Eventually I started going to school full time and changed foster homes a few more times. I really can't say how much time passed before it happened, but eventually, I was placed up for adoption. I was never actually told I was up for adoption, so I'm not sure how soon after I was found it was. But eventually people started coming to meet me, but these people weren't looking for a missing child, they were looking to adopt one. But I definitely did not represent myself as a good candidate. I had a story that no one believed or could verify. I insisted my parents would eventually find me, and I rarely had a day that I wasn't crying until my eyes burned. This story doesn't have a happy ending. I never saw my parents again, and I was a ward of the state until I was 18 and went nowhere from there. My teens were filled with delinquency, and I did a brief stint in something similar to juvie in San Diego called chaparral. I never went to college and never really started getting my life together until I was around 24. I haven't talked publicly about this before now, at least not since I was a child, speaking to everyone who was trying to figure out where I came from. I still have Sparky, he's old and worn. Still in one piece. No longer white, he's now a dark shade of gray. He sits on my dresser and is there, just like he always has been, as long as I've been here.